I stood on the front porch of the house I built with my own 2 hands 30 years ago, and for the first time in my life, I felt like a trespasser. The heavy oak door, which I had sanded and stained myself, refused to open. My key did not fit. It wasn't just stuck, it was the wrong key because the lock was brand new. Through the frosted glass, I could hear the pop of a cork and the roar of laughter. My son's laughter. Inside, the fireplace was roaring, warming the parasites who were drinking my wine. But on the second-floor balcony, shivering in the biting December wind, stood my wife, Viola. She was crying silently, looking at the Christmas lights as if they were prison bars. They didn't know I was back. They thought the old lion was gone for good. But they were wrong. I didn't knock. I didn't yell. I simply turned around and vanished into the shadows. The war had just begun. Before I tell you how I dismantled their little party piece by piece, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments which city you are tuning in from. I always love reading your stories. Now, let's go back to the night my family decided to betray me. My name is Ezekiel Robinson, but everyone in Chicago construction knows me as Zeke. At 73 years old, people look at my gray beard and my cane, and they see a harmless old man. They forget that before I wore these suits, I laid bricks in freezing temperatures and poured concrete until my hands bled. I built this family's fortune from the dirt up. I thought I was raising a legacy. It turns out I was raising vultures. I was supposed to be in Wisconsin for another 3 days. I had told my family I was going on a fishing trip with some old buddies. That was a lie. I was actually scouting a new land development project near the border. I never really retired. A man who stops working is a man who starts dying. But the deal closed early, and a heavy snowstorm was rolling in from the north. I decided to drive back to surprise Viola. We had been married for 50 years, and I hated leaving her alone in that big house, especially with her arthritis acting up in the winter. The drive back was brutal. The heater in my truck was rattling, and the roads were slick with black ice. By the time I pulled into our long driveway, it was past 8 in the evening. The house looked magnificent. It was a 3-story colonial-style estate that sat on 2 acres of prime land. I remembered the day I broke ground on this lot. I was young, hungry, and determined to give my wife a castle. Now, seeing the warm yellow glow spilling from the windows against the blue snow, I felt a surge of pride. That pride lasted exactly 2 minutes. I parked my truck down the street, wanting to walk up and surprise them. I grabbed my duffel bag and trudged through the snow. The wind cut through my coat like a knife. When I reached the front door, I was ready for warmth. I was ready for Viola's pot roast. I slid my key into the deadbolt. It hit metal and stopped halfway. I frowned, wiggling it. Nothing. I pulled it out and tried again. Still nothing. I leaned in closer, squinting in the dim porch light. The hardware was different. My old lock was a solid, tarnished brass piece I had installed in the 90s. This one was shiny, modern nickel. It looked cheap. It looked foreign. Confusion washed over me, quickly followed by a cold spike of adrenaline. Had there been a break-in? Had the locksmith been called for an emergency? I raised my hand to pound on the door, but then I heard it. Laughter. Loud, raucous laughter coming from the living room. I lowered my hand. Instincts honed from 50 years in the construction business kicked in. When something doesn't look right on a job site, you don't charge in blindly. You observe. You assess the structural damage before you start swinging a sledgehammer. I stepped off the porch, my boots crunching softly in the fresh snow. I moved around the side of the house toward the garage. The wind was howling now, biting at my exposed ears. But the heat rising in my chest kept me warm. It was the heat of anger. I reached the side service door of the garage. This was a heavy steel door I had reinforced myself years ago. I prayed they hadn't changed this one too. I punched in the code on the keypad. 1950. The year Viola was born. The small light blinked green. Thank God. The mechanism clicked, and the door swung open silently. I slipped inside the garage, closing the door behind me to shut out the howling wind. The garage was dark, smelling of oil and old timber. I saw my son Damon's car, a flashy new sedan that I knew he couldn't afford. Parked next to it was a Lexus SUV that belonged to my daughter-in-law's parents, Bob and Karen. And there, shoved into the corner, covered with a tarp as if it were trash, was my vintage Mustang. My heart rate picked up. I moved to the door that connected the garage to the kitchen. I cracked it open just an inch. The smell hit me first. Roast beef, rosemary, and the distinct, expensive aroma of aged red wine. I peered through the crack. The kitchen was a mess of catering trays and empty bottles, but the voices were coming from the great room. I crept into the mudroom, standing in the shadows where the light from the hallway couldn't reach me. From here, I had a direct line of sight into the living room. What I saw made my blood run cold. My son Damon was standing by the fireplace. He looked flushed, happy, holding a crystal wine glass. Next to him was his wife, Tiffany. She was wearing a red dress that looked like it cost more than my first car. And sitting on my leather armchairs, with their feet propped up on the coffee table, were Bob and Karen, Tiffany's parents. Bob was a man I had never respected. He was a failed businessman who spent more time grooming his comb-over than looking at his balance sheets. He was holding a bottle of wine. My eyes narrowed. It wasn't just any bottle. It was the 1995 Cabernet Sauvignon I had bought in Napa Valley for our 25th anniversary. I had been saving that bottle for my 50th anniversary with Viola, which was only 2 months away. Bob poured a generous amount into his glass, spilling a few drops on the Persian rug. He didn't even notice. "This is excellent stuff. Zeke really knows his wine. I will give him that," Bob said, his voice slurred. "Too bad he is not here to enjoy it." Karen laughed, a shrill sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, stop it, Bob. The old man is probably freezing his backside off in a cabin somewhere in Wisconsin. Let him catch his fish. We have bigger fish to fry." Damon raised his glass. "To the new house," he said. My grip tightened on the doorframe until my knuckles turned white. To the new house? This was my house. My name was on the deed. My sweat was in the foundation. Tiffany wrapped her arm around Damon, smiling that predatory smile I had always distrusted. "To us," she corrected him, "and to finally having the space we deserve. It is going to be so much better once we redecorate. This dark wood is so depressing. We need to brighten it up, make it modern." Bob burped loudly. "And what about the old-timers? When are they moving out?" Damon hesitated, looking down at his wine. "I told you, Dad signed the power of attorney. I am handling it. We are moving them to the suite on the ground floor tonight. The master bedroom is yours, Bob. You and Mom can take the upstairs. Dad and Mom don't need all that space. They are getting frail. It is a safety hazard for them to use the stairs." Frail? I wanted to kick the door open and show them exactly how frail I was. I could still bench press more than my soft corporate son. But then I noticed something was missing. Or rather, someone. Where was Viola? I scanned the room. She wasn't in her chair. She wasn't in the kitchen. Then I saw movement through the large French doors that led to the back patio. The curtains were drawn, but there was a gap. Outside, in the freezing darkness, a small figure was standing on the balcony. I felt a physical blow to my chest. It was Viola. She wasn't wearing her heavy coat. She just had a thin shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She was hugging herself, rocking back and forth. Even from this distance, I could tell she was crying. She was looking in at them, at her son and her in-laws drinking her husband's wine, laughing in her home, and she looked completely defeated. She looked like a ghost who had already passed on. Why was she outside? Had they locked her out? Or had the atmosphere inside become so toxic that she preferred the biting cold to their company? I watched as Tiffany walked over to the window, glanced at Viola outside, and then casually pulled the drapes shut, blocking her out completely. "She is just being dramatic," Tiffany said, turning back to the group. "She said she needs fresh air. Let her cool off. She will come in when she is hungry. She is getting so difficult lately. It is definitely early onset dementia." Dementia? My Viola was the sharpest woman I knew. She did the crossword puzzle in ink every morning. She managed our household finances for 40 years without a single error. The rage that filled me then was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of a young man. It was the cold, calculating fury of an old predator. I could have walked in there right then. I could have thrown Bob out the window and broken Damon's nose. I could have screamed until the police came. But as I looked at the closed drapes and thought about my wife shivering in the cold, I realized that yelling wouldn't be enough. If I walked in there now, they would gasp. They would apologize. They would make up excuses. Damon would say it was just a misunderstanding. They would retreat, but they would only wait for the next opportunity to strike. They thought I was old. They thought I was weak. They thought I was losing my mind. If I confronted them now, I would only win a battle. I wanted to win the war. I needed to know everything. I needed to know how deep the rot went. I needed to know who was pulling the strings. And most importantly, I needed to make sure that when I finally struck back, they would never recover. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I looked at the keypad on the alarm system panel near the mudroom door. The green light was steady. They hadn't changed the alarm code yet, probably because Damon didn't know how to reprogram the main system. That was their mistake. I carefully backed out of the mudroom. I stepped back into the garage. I didn't go to the main house. Instead, I moved toward the back of the garage, where a narrow staircase led up to a small, unfinished storage loft above the garage. It was a space I used to store old blueprints and holiday decorations. It was freezing up there, but it had a vent that connected directly to the HVAC system of the main house. I climbed the stairs silently, my joints aching in the cold. I sat down on a stack of insulation rolls in the dark loft. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened the app that controlled the smart home system I had installed last year, a system Damon thought was too complicated for me to understand. I tapped the screen and accessed the security cameras in the living room. The image popped up, crisp and clear. I could see them toasting again. I could hear every word they said through my earbuds. I sat there in the dark, watching my enemies celebrate their victory. "I am not going to interrupt you," I whispered to the screen. "Enjoy the wine, Bob. Get comfortable, Tiffany. Laugh while you can, Damon. Because Santa Claus is back in town, and you are all on the naughty list." I watched for another hour. I watched as they made plans to sell my vintage car. I watched as Bob talked about leveraging the equity in my house to pay off his gambling debts. I watched until the fire died down and they all stumbled off to bed, my bed. Only when the house was dark did I move. I needed to get to Viola. But I couldn't just walk in. I had to be a ghost. I waited until 3 in the morning. Then, I quietly descended the stairs. I didn't go into the house. I went to the main electrical panel in the garage. I looked at the breakers: master bedroom, kitchen, living room. I reached out and flipped the main breaker for the second floor. Upstairs, the lights would be dead. The heat would stop running. Then, I opened the garage door and stepped out into the snow again. I walked around the back of the house to the patio. Viola was no longer on the balcony. She must have gone into the guest room on the first floor, the room they had banished us to. I approached the guest room window. It was low to the ground. I tapped on the glass 3 times, the signal we used when we were dating 50 years ago, sneaking out to see each other. Tap, tap, tap. A moment later, the curtains parted. Viola's face appeared, pale and tear-stained in the moonlight. Her eyes went wide when she saw me. She fumbled with the latch and threw the window open. "Zeke?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Oh God, Zeke, you are here." I climbed through the window, snow falling from my coat onto the carpet. I pulled her into my arms. She was freezing. She felt so small, so fragile. "They took the keys, Zeke," she sobbed into my chest. "They took everything. They said you knew. They said you agreed to it." I held her tight, stroking her gray hair. "I know, Vi. I know everything." I pulled back and looked into her eyes. The tears were still there, but I needed her to be strong. I needed her to be my partner one last time. "Listen to me, Viola. I need you to trust me. Tomorrow morning, I am going to walk into that kitchen, and I am going to pretend I don't know anything. I am going to play the confused old man they think I am." She looked at me, confusion knitting her brow. "Why? Why don't you just throw them out?" "Because," I said, wiping a tear from her cheek with my thumb. "Throwing them out is too easy. I want to destroy the world they think they are building. I want them to lose everything. And to do that, I need them to think they have won." Viola took a deep breath. She straightened her spine. The sadness in her eyes was replaced by a spark of the woman who had marched beside me in the protests of the 60s. "Okay, Zeke," she whispered. "What do we do?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "First," I said, glancing at the ceiling where my son was sleeping, "we are going to let them have the worst night's sleep of their lives." And just like that, the game was on. They wanted to treat me like a stranger in my own home? Fine. But they forgot one thing. A stranger is just a friend you haven't met yet. But an enemy? An enemy is someone who knows exactly where you sleep. The sun was barely up over Chicago when I walked back down the driveway to my truck. The air was crisp, biting at my nose, but the cold was the only thing that felt real. I had spent the last few hours of the night sitting in the dark with Viola, holding her hand, whispering our battle plan until she finally fell asleep. Then, I had slipped out the window just as silently as I had entered. I needed to make an entrance. I needed to ring that doorbell. I needed to look them in the eye and let them lie to my face. I sat in the cab of my truck for a moment, looking at my hands on the steering wheel. These hands had built skyscrapers. They had mixed mortar in the dead of winter. Now, they were gripping the leather, steadying themselves for the hardest job I had ever taken on. Acting. I had to be the confused, tired old man they wanted me to be. I started the engine, let it rumble for a minute to announce my presence, and then drove the remaining 50 feet up the driveway I had paved myself. I grabbed my duffel bag, slammed the truck door, and walked up the steps. This time, I didn't reach for my keys. I knew they wouldn't work. Instead, I pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed inside. It was a new chime. Of course it was. The old one, a deep, resonant brass bell, was gone. This new one sounded digital, tinny, like something you would hear in a cheap department store. I waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Finally, the door swung open. Tiffany stood there. She was wearing a silk robe that I recognized. It was the one I had bought Viola for Christmas 3 years ago. It was too long for Tiffany, dragging slightly on the floor. Her hair was messy, her eyes puffy with sleep. But the moment she saw me, her face went through a spasm of emotions. Shock, annoyance, panic, and finally, a plastered-on, sugary smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dad!" she shrieked, her voice cracking slightly. "Oh my God, you are back." She didn't move to hug me. She stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance like a bouncer at a club. "I thought you were in Wisconsin until Tuesday," she said, clutching the lapels of my wife's robe. I leaned heavily on my cane, hunching my shoulders. "The storm," I mumbled, making my voice sound gravelly and weak. My knees were aching, Tiff. The cold got into my bones. I just wanted to come home. She blinked, glancing behind her into the house, as if checking for bodies. "Oh, of course. Well, come in, come in. It is freezing out there." She stepped aside, and I crossed the threshold. The warmth of the house hit me, smelling of stale wine and expensive perfume. I took 2 steps into the foyer and stopped dead. My grip on the duffel bag tightened until my fingers cramped. The house was white. The warm, honey-colored oak paneling in the hallway, painted over in a sterile, hospital white. The vintage runner rug that Viola's mother had woven by hand, gone. But what made my stomach turn wasn't the paint or the rug. It was the walls. For 40 years, the hallway of the Robinson house had been a museum of our history. On the left wall, there had been a black and white photo of my great-grandfather, a sharecropper who bought his freedom. Next to it was a picture of my father in his World War II uniform. There were photos of me laying the first brick of my company, photos of Viola marching in Selma, photos of Damon's graduation. It was our bloodline, framed in mahogany. Now the walls were bare, naked. Actually not bare. They had been replaced. Hanging where my great-grandfather used to be was a canvas painted with gray and beige blobs. Abstract art, soulless, generic, hotel lobby art. I stared at the gray blobs, feeling a burning sensation in my chest. They hadn't just redecorated, they had erased us. They had whitewashed my legacy to make the house more palatable for their country club friends. "Dad?" Tiffany's voice cut through the red haze in my mind. "Are you okay? You look confused." I turned to look at her, forcing my face into a mask of bewilderment. "Where are the pictures?" I asked, pointing a shaking finger at the wall. "My father. The pictures." Tiffany laughed, a nervous, dismissive sound. "Oh, those. We put them in storage, Dad. They were so dusty, and the frames were falling apart. We wanted to freshen the place up for you and Mom, make it look more modern. Don't you love the open feel? It is very chic." Chic. My history was in a box somewhere, probably rotting in the damp basement, so the house could look chic. I nodded slowly, swallowing the bile in my throat. "It is very bright," I said. Just then, I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. My son, Damon, came jogging down. He was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt that said CEO Mindset. He looked hungover. His eyes widened when he saw me. Dad? What the hell? I mean, what a surprise. He rushed over and gave me a quick, awkward hug. He smelled like bourbon and guilt. I patted his back weakly. Good to see you, son. I cut the trip short. Damon pulled back, exchanging a frantic look with Tiffany. Right. Well, it is great you are here. We were just getting things organized. I looked past him, towards the staircase. Well, I am beat, I said, taking a step toward the stairs. I just want to go up to my room, take a hot shower, and lay down in my bed. Stop! Damon and Tiffany shouted it at the same time. I froze, looking at them. Damon cleared his throat, his face turning red. Wait, Dad, you can't go upstairs. I frowned, playing my part. Why? Is the roof leaking again? No, Tiffany interjected, stepping between me and the stairs. It is just, well, we made some changes. For safety. Safety? I asked. Yes. Tiffany put on her most condescending voice, the one you use for a toddler or a golden retriever. We were so worried about you and Mom using those stairs. You know how bad Mom's arthritis is, and now with your knees hurting. We didn't want you to fall. It is a death trap for people your age. So, Damon added, jumping in, we moved you guys to the downstairs suite. I stared at them. The downstairs suite was a polite name for my old home office. It was a 10 by 12 room off the kitchen. It had a small window that looked out at the air conditioning unit. It had no bathtub, just a cramped standing shower. You put us in the office? I asked. Then who is sleeping in my room? Who is in the master suite? Damon scratched the back of his neck. Well, since Bob and Karen are staying for the holidays, we gave them the master. My jaw dropped. I didn't have to fake the shock this time. You gave my bedroom to your in-laws. Tiffany crossed her arms, her tone sharpening. Dad, please be reasonable. My father has terrible sciatica. He literally cannot climb stairs. He needs the jacuzzi tub for his therapy. And my mother has vertigo. It would be cruel to make them sleep anywhere else. Besides, the downstairs room is cozy. We put a nice TV in there for you. It is better this way. Easier access to the kitchen for your snacks. The way she said snacks made it sound like I was a senile glutton. So, let me get this straight, I said slowly, testing the waters. I built this house. I paid for that bed. But I have to sleep in the office because Bob has a sore leg? Damon sighed, rolling his eyes as if I were being incredibly difficult. Dad, don't make this a thing. We are doing what is best for the family. Bob and Karen are guests. We have to be hospitable. Guests. I was the guest now, a guest in the house I paid for, paying taxes on, and filled with memories they were actively scrubbing away. I looked at the stairs again. I imagined Bob, that bloated leech, soaking in my tub, using my custom-ordered Italian tiles. I imagined Karen opening Viola's jewelry armoire. I took a deep breath. I could fight them right now. I could pull out the deed from my safe, if they hadn't cracked it yet, and call the sheriff. But then I remembered Viola's face in the moonlight last night. I remembered the plan. Let them get comfortable. Let them think they have won. The higher they climb, the harder the fall. I let my shoulders slump. I let the cane tremble in my hand. All right, I sighed, defeated. You are right. The stairs are getting hard for me. Tiffany beamed, a victorious flash in her eyes. See, I told you he would understand, Damon. It is just logic. I will just go put my bag in the office then, I said. I shuffled toward the kitchen hallway. The door to the old office was open. I walked in. It was worse than I thought. They had shoved a queen-size mattress against the wall. My mahogany desk, the desk where I had drawn up the blueprints for half the neighborhood, was gone. In its place was a cheap plastic folding table with a small TV on it. The bookshelves were empty, my collection of architectural history books replaced by stacks of Karen's fashion magazines. Sitting on the edge of the bed was Viola. She looked up when I walked in. She was wearing a simple house dress, her hands folded in her lap. She looked small in this cramped room. But when our eyes met, I saw the steel in her spine. Hi, old man, she said softly. I closed the door behind me, shutting out the white hallway and the fake art. I dropped the acting. I stood tall. They took the photos, Vi, I whispered, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "They took the picture of your father." "I know," she said. "I found them in the garage this morning, in a trash bag." I closed my eyes. A trash bag. She stood up and walked over to me, placing her cool hands on my face. "Let them have the room, Zeke. Let them have the tub. Let them have the view. It doesn't matter." "It matters," I hissed. "It is our home." "Not anymore," she said firmly. "It is a battlefield now, and you don't sleep in the general's tent on the front lines. You sleep in the trenches until the war is won." I looked at her, loving her more in that moment than I had in 50 years. She was right. I put my hand over hers. "Bob has sciatica," I said, a dry chuckle escaping my throat. Viola smirked. "Bob has gout because he eats too much rich food and drinks too much port." We both laughed, a quiet, conspiratorial sound. Just then, the door opened without a knock. Bob stood there. He was wearing my silk pajama bottoms. They were stretched tight across his stomach. He held a coffee mug, my coffee mug, the one that said "World's Best Grandpa." "Morning, Ezekiel," he boomed, his voice overly loud. "Heard you made it back. Cozy little setup you got down here. Very efficient." I looked at the man wearing my pants, drinking from my mug, standing in the doorway of the room he had exiled me to. "Very efficient, Bob," I said, forcing a smile that felt like cracking concrete. "Hey," he continued, looking around the cramped room with a sneer. "Karen and I were thinking of heading to the club for lunch. Put it on your tab, if that is okay, since we are technically family now." He winked. He actually winked at me. I gripped my cane. The urge to swing it was overwhelming. "Of course," I said. "Use the membership number. Enjoy the crab cakes." Bob nodded, satisfied. "You are a good man, Zeke. A real trooper." He turned and waddled away. I looked at Viola. Her eyes were hard as flint. "Enjoy the crab cakes," she repeated my words. I sat down on the lumpy mattress. "Oh, he will enjoy them," I said, pulling out my phone and opening the banking app. "But he might find them a little hard to swallow when the card gets declined." Viola sat next to me. "Not yet," she whispered. "Wait." I looked at the screen. My finger hovered over the freeze card button. "Wait until the bill comes," she said. I smiled. She was more ruthless than I was. "You are right," I said. "Let him eat, let him drink, let him get fat and happy, because the slaughter is coming." The afternoon stretched out like a long, painful sentence in a prison I had paid for. After the humiliation of being relocated to the cramped office, I tried to find a small island of normalcy. For me, that had always been my music. In the corner of the great room, which they hadn't completely gutted yet, sat my vintage turntable. It was a 1970 Marantz, a piece of machinery as reliable as my own heartbeat. I had a collection of vinyl that I had been curating since I was 18 years old. Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk. These weren't just records. They were the soundtrack of my life. When the world outside was too loud, too white, or too cold, I would put on Blue and Green, pour a glass of bourbon, and let the trumpet wash away the dust of the construction site. I walked over to the turntable. My hands were shaking slightly, not from age, but from the effort of keeping my temper in check. I selected a Coltrane album. I needed something complex to untangle the knots in my stomach. I carefully placed the needle in the groove. The soft crackle was followed by the smooth, melancholic wail of the saxophone. It was beautiful. It was dignified. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, I felt like the master of my house again. I closed my eyes, letting the music fill the space that had been stripped of my family photos. Then, the music stopped. It didn't fade out. It was ripped away. The needle scratched violently across the vinyl with a sound like a scream. I snapped my eyes open. Bob was standing there. He had lifted the tone arm and dropped it carelessly onto the wood of the console. He was holding a remote control in his other hand, the remote to the 75-inch television I had mounted above the fireplace. "Jesus, Zeke," Bob groaned, rubbing his temples as if he were in physical pain. "Do we really need that racket right now? I am trying to relax. My head is pounding." I looked at the record. There was a visible scratch across the surface, a record I had kept pristine for 40 years, ruined in 2 seconds by a man who probably thought elevator music was high art. "It is Coltrane, Bob," I said, my voice low. "It is not racket, it is jazz." Bob waved his hand dismissively, collapsing onto my leather recliner. Yeah, well, it sounds like a bunch of cats fighting in an alley to me. No melody, just noise. Besides, the tournament is on. He pointed the remote at the TV and cranked the volume. The lush green of a golf course filled the screen. The hushed whispers of the commentators replaced the soul of the saxophone. Bob didn't ask. He didn't negotiate. He just took over. He put his feet up, shoes still on, onto the ottoman Viola had embroidered by hand. I stood there, watching him. He looked like a toad sitting on a lily pad he hadn't grown. The disrespect was so casual, so effortless. It wasn't just that he didn't like my music. It was that he didn't think my enjoyment mattered. In his mind, his desire to watch men hit a little white ball superseded my right to listen to music in my own living room. I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Tiffany. She was smiling that tight, fake smile again. "Dad, why don't you go help Mom in the kitchen?" she suggested, her tone implying that I was being a nuisance. "She is making a mess in there. Maybe you can keep her focused." I looked at the scratched record one last time. I wanted to grab Bob by his collar and throw him out into the snow, but I heard Viola's voice in my head. "Wait. Let them get comfortable." I took a deep breath, swallowing my pride. It tasted like ash. "Sure, Tiff," I said, making my voice sound hollow. "I will go check on her. I guess my hearing isn't what it used to be anyway. Maybe it was too loud." I shuffled away, leaving Bob to his golf and his arrogance. The kitchen was warm, steamy, and smelled like heaven. Viola was in her element. Despite everything, despite the eviction from our bedroom, despite the coldness of her daughter-in-law, she was doing what she always did. She was loving them through food. She was frying chicken in her cast-iron skillet, the one her mother had given her. She had a pot of collard greens simmering with smoked turkey necks, and a pan of cornbread in the oven. It was the meal we made for celebrations. It was a peace offering. I watched her for a moment. She was humming softly, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She was trying so hard to prove her worth to them. She thought that if she just cooked well enough, if she just loved them hard enough, they would remember that we were family. I walked over and kissed her cheek. "Smells good, baby," I whispered. She leaned into me for a second. "I hope they like it, Zeke. Tiffany is so particular about her diet these days." "They will love it," I lied. "Who doesn't love your chicken?" But when we finally sat down to dinner, I realized that for some people, hate is stronger than hunger. The dining room table was set. Tiffany had insisted on using her modern, square plates instead of Viola's floral china. Bob sat at the head of the table, my seat. Karen sat opposite him. Damon and Tiffany sat on one side, leaving me and Viola to squeeze into the remaining spots on the side facing the wall. Viola brought out the platter of chicken. It was golden, crispy, and perfect. She placed it in the center of the table with a shy smile. "Dinner is served," she said softly. Silence descended on the table. It wasn't the silence of anticipation, it was the silence of judgment. Karen leaned forward, peering at the chicken through her reading glasses. She wrinkled her nose, as if she were inspecting a specimen in a laboratory. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Fried?" Viola's smile faltered. "Yes, it is my special recipe. Zeke loves it." Karen sighed, picking up her fork and poking at a drumstick. She didn't take it, she just pushed it around. "It looks very heavy," Karen said. "I mean, look at the grease on the napkin, Viola. It is positively swimming in oil." "It is not greasy," I said, my grip tightening on my knife. "It is moist." "That is how it is supposed to be." Karen looked at me with pity. "Well, I suppose that is fine for you, Ezekiel. But honestly, Bob and I have to watch our cholesterol. We can't eat like this." She waved her hand over the table, encompassing the greens, the cornbread, the chicken, everything that represented my wife's heritage and effort. "Like what?" I asked, dangerously quiet. Karen let out a small, breathless laugh, looking at Tiffany for support. "You know what I mean. This kind of food. It is just so unhealthy. No wonder heart disease is such a problem in your demographic." The room went dead silent. The air was sucked out of the space. It wasn't just a critique of the cooking. It was a slap in the face. It was a reminder that no matter how big this house was, no matter how much money I had made, to Karen, we were still just those people who ate greasy food and died early. I looked at Damon, my son. The boy I had raised to be proud of who he was. The boy who used to beg for this exact meal on his birthdays. "Damon," I said, my voice steady. "Are you going to say something?" Damon looked up from his plate. He looked at Karen, then at Tiffany, and finally at me. I saw the conflict in his eyes, but it was brief. Fear won. Fear of his wife, fear of losing his status, fear of the people he was trying to impress. "Mom," Damon mumbled, avoiding my gaze. "You know Tiff and her parents eat light. Maybe next time just grill some salmon or make a salad. This is a lot of heavy stuff." My heart broke. Not for me, but for Viola. I looked at my wife. She was staring at her plate. Her hands were in her lap, and I could see her shoulders shaking. She wasn't crying, but she was trembling. The fork she was holding slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the floor. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I wanted to make a nice dinner." Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, don't be dramatic, Viola. We aren't saying it is poison. We just care about our health." That was it. The beast inside me roared. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to take that golden chicken and shove it down Karen's throat. I wanted to scream until the windows shattered. But then, I felt it. Under the table, Viola's hand found mine. Her skin was cold, but her grip was desperate. She squeezed my hand hard. 1, 2, 3 times. "Stop. Don't do it. Not yet." I looked at her. She raised her head slowly. Her eyes were wet, but behind the tears there was a fire I hadn't seen in years. She was hurt, yes, but she was also angry, and Viola's anger was a slow-burning fuse. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. I took a deep breath. I let the rage settle into the pit of my stomach, turning into cold, hard resolve. If they wanted to treat me like a senile old fool who couldn't defend his wife, then that is exactly who I would be. I would be the harmless old man until the moment I cut their throats, financially speaking. I bent down, picking up her fork with a groan, exaggerating the stiffness in my back. I popped back up, looking around the table with a vacant, confused smile. "Salmon?" I asked loudly, cupping my ear. "Who is catching salmon? I thought we were having chicken." Tiffany let out an exasperated sigh, sharing a look with Karen that said, "See, he is losing it." "Never mind, Dad," Tiffany said, speaking slowly and loudly. "Just eat your chicken." I nodded, picking up a drumstick and taking a massive, defiant bite. Grease ran down my chin. I didn't wipe it. "This is the best damn chicken I have ever had," I announced, chewing with my mouth open, watching Karen flinch with disgust. "You know, Viola, reminds me of that time in '72 when I accidentally backed the truck into the cement mixer. Or was it '73? I started rambling. I told a pointless, meandering story that went nowhere. I mixed up names. I drooled a little. I became the caricature they despised. And it worked. I saw their shoulders relax. I saw the tension leave Damon's face. They stopped looking at me as a threat and started looking at me as a piece of furniture. Annoying, old, but ultimately harmless. They began to talk amongst themselves, ignoring me completely. They talked about the renovations. They talked about the money they would get from the refinancing. They talked about us as if we weren't there. Damon leaned over to Bob. "The appraiser is coming tomorrow," he whispered. "I need to make sure Dad is out of the house." Bob chuckled, sipping my wine. "Just give him a quarter and tell him to go buy a newspaper. He won't know the difference." I chewed my chicken, savoring the spice, savoring the flavor of my wife's love. Under the table, I was still holding Viola's hand. I rubbed my thumb over her knuckles. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow the appraiser comes. I smiled a greasy, senile smile at Bob. Let the appraiser come. I had a feeling he was going to find some very interesting structural issues with their plan. Issues that no amount of white paint could cover up. Dinner was over, but the indigestion was just beginning. It sat in my chest like a cold stone, heavy and sharp. I watched as Viola quietly cleared the table, her hands moving with the practiced grace of a woman who had spent 50 years serving others. Tiffany didn't offer to help, neither did Karen. They retreated to the patio to smoke their slim cigarettes, complaining about the draft. Damon was in the kitchen, aggressively loading the dishwasher as if the plates had offended him. I knew I had to disappear. Not physically, but socially. I needed to become invisible so I could see clearly. I limped over to my favorite armchair in the living room, the one leather chair they hadn't moved to the basement yet because it was too heavy. I sat down with a groan that wasn't entirely fake. My joints were screaming, but my mind was razor sharp. I leaned my head back, closed my eyes, and let my mouth hang open slightly. I adjusted my breathing, making it slow, rhythmic, and heavy. I even added a little rattle at the back of my throat. The old man's snore. It was the perfect camouflage. To them, a sleeping old man is just furniture. He is deaf, dumb, and out of the picture. They forget that even with eyes closed, ears can still hear. 10 minutes passed. I heard the patio door slide open. Tiffany walked in, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The clicking stopped at the kitchen island. "Is he out?" Tiffany asked. Her voice was low, but in the open concept layout I had designed to maximize acoustics, it carried straight to me. Damon muttered something. I heard the sound of a wet sponge hitting the counter. "Yeah, he is out," Damon said, sounding exhausted. "He ate half a chicken. The itis got him. He will be comatose until morning." "Good," Tiffany snapped. "Stop cleaning, Damon. We need to talk. Now." I kept my breathing steady, though my heart began to hammer against my ribs. I focused on relaxing my hands, which wanted to curl into fists. "What is it, Tiff? Can't it wait? I am tired." "No, it cannot wait," she hissed. "My dad just got off the phone with his partners. The bridge loan fell through." There was a silence. I could visualize Damon freezing, the sponge dripping in his hand. "What?" Damon whispered. "You said that loan was a sure thing. You said Bob just needed a temporary cash infusion to launch the new investment tier." Tiffany let out a frustrated sigh. "It is a sure thing, Damon, but the banks are being difficult. They don't understand the visionary nature of Dad's business model. They are calling it high risk just because the revenue comes from downstream recruitment. It is ridiculous. But that is not the point. The point is, he needs liquidity. By Friday. Downstream recruitment. I almost choked on my own spit. I knew exactly what that meant. It was a pyramid scheme. A fancy, high society, multi-level marketing scam. Bob wasn't a businessman. He was a con artist in a polyester suit. And he was broke. "So, what does that mean for us?" Damon asked, his voice trembling. "It means," Tiffany said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow louder than a shout, "we need to leverage this asset. We need the equity in this house." "This house?" Damon sounded sick. "Tiff, we can't. The house is worth $1.5 million. It is paid off. That is my parents' entire life savings. It is dead capital, Damon." Tiffany slammed her hand on the counter. "It is just sitting here, doing nothing, while my father's empire is crumbling. If Dad's company goes under, do you know what happens to us? Do you know what happens to your job as vice president of sales? You lose everything. The car, the country club, the status. Do you want to go back to being a mid-level manager at a paper company?" I heard the sound of glass breaking. Damon must have dropped a tumbler. I don't want that," he stammered. "Then fix it," Tiffany commanded. "We need the deed. We need your father to sign the transfer tomorrow. Once the title is in your name, we can get a hard money loan against the property within 24 hours. We hand that cash to my dad, he stabilizes the company, and in 6 months, we pay off the loan. No one gets hurt." Damon was quiet for a long time. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. I was praying, begging silently for my son to find his backbone, to say no, to say that gambling his parents' home on a pyramid scheme was insanity. "But what about them?" Damon asked finally. "Dad and Mom. If we mortgage the house, where do they live? We can't keep them in the office forever. And if something goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong," Tiffany interrupted smoothly. "But you are right. They can't stay here. It is too crowded. And honestly, Damon, look at your mother. She is forgetting things. She is leaving grease everywhere. And your dad? He is barely functional. They need professional care." "Professional care?" Damon asked. "You mean a home?" "I mean a facility," Tiffany corrected. "I found a place. It is called Shady Pines. It is in the suburbs." "Shady Pines?" Damon sounded skeptical. "Isn't that the state-funded one? The one near the landfill?" "It is affordable, Damon." Tiffany's voice rose. Then she caught herself and lowered it again. "Look, it is clean. They have a cafeteria. They have bingo. It is perfectly adequate for people with their limited needs. Plus, it is only $2,000 a month. If we use their Social Security checks, it covers the cost completely. We won't have to spend a dime of our own money. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Shady Pines. I knew that place. I had driven past it. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. A place where the hallways smelled of urine and bleach, and the residents sat in wheelchairs facing walls, waiting to die. They wanted to take the house I built. Every beam, every brick laid with the intention of creating a sanctuary for my family, and use it to fund a criminal enterprise. And in exchange, they would dump Viola and me into a state-run hellhole to rot. Damon, Tiffany said, her voice turning soft, seductive. Think about it. Think about us. Think about the freedom. Once they are gone, we can knock down walls. We can put in a pool. We can finally live the life we deserve. My dad will make us rich, Damon. We just need to get over this one little hurdle. I heard the rustle of fabric. She was hugging him, manipulating him. Damon sighed, a long, defeated sound. I don't know if he will sign, Tiff. He is stubborn. He will sign, Tiffany said, her voice like ice. If he thinks it is just a temporary formality for tax purposes, or if we tell him that the state is coming for the house because of unpaid taxes. We can scare him, Damon. He is old. He is confused. He trusts you. You are his son. Use that. Use that. Use the love I had for him as a weapon against me. Okay, Damon whispered. Okay, I will do it. Tomorrow. Good boy, Tiffany purred. Now clean up this mess. I am going to bed. I heard her footsteps fade away towards the stairs. Damon stayed in the kitchen for another 5 minutes. I could hear him opening a bottle. The glug, glug, glug of liquor being poured into a glass. He drank it fast. Liquid courage for a coward. Then, the lights in the kitchen clicked off. Damon walked past me in the dark living room. He stopped right in front of my chair. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing steady, though every muscle in my body was coiled tight enough to snap bone. I am sorry, Dad, Damon whispered into the darkness. But you had your time. It is my turn now. He walked away. I waited until I heard his bedroom door click shut upstairs. Then I opened my eyes. The room was pitch black, illuminated only by the faint glow of the streetlights outside the window. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there, staring into the dark. My turn now. That is what he had said. As if life were a game where you tagged your parents out and took their place on the board. I thought about the day Damon was born. I remembered holding him in the delivery room, his tiny hand gripping my pinky finger. I had promised him the world that day. I had worked double shifts, missed holidays, destroyed my back, all to keep that promise. I had built a foundation so he could stand taller than me, and now he was using that height to step on my neck. I looked around the shadows of the room. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a crime scene. A conspiracy was happening under my roof. They weren't just ungrateful, they were dangerous. Bob, the desperate con man, Tiffany, the ruthless architect, and Damon, the weak instrument. They wanted the house? Fine. They wanted a signature? I would give them one. But it wouldn't be the signature they expected. I slowly pushed myself up from the armchair. My knees popped, loud in the silence. I wasn't just an old man anymore. I was a general who had just intercepted the enemy's coded messages. I knew their timeline. I knew their objective. And I knew their weakness. Greed. Blind, stupid greed. They thought the house was worth $1.5 million. They thought Bob's company could be saved. They thought Shady Pines was my destiny. I walked to the window and looked out at the snowy driveway. My reflection stared back at me, a gray-haired man with eyes that burned like coals. Tomorrow, the renovation would begin. But I wasn't going to knock down walls. I was going to knock down their entire reality. I turned and headed for the office where Viola was sleeping. I needed to make a phone call. It was late, but the man I needed to call never slept. It was time to bring in the demolition crew. If you want to break a man, you do not need a hammer. You just need to make him doubt his own mind. You need to move the horizon line just a little bit every day until he does not know which way is up. The next morning began the psychological warfare. I woke up in the cramped office with a stiff neck and a headache that throbbed behind my eyes. I sat up and reached for the nightstand where I always kept my blood pressure medication. My hand patted the empty surface. The amber bottle was gone. I frowned, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. I knew I had put it there. I was a creature of habit. For 40 years I laid out my clothes the night before. I drank my coffee black at 6 in the morning, and I took my lisinopril before I brushed my teeth. I got up and checked the floor. Maybe I had knocked it over in the dark. Nothing. I walked into the kitchen. Tiffany was there, blending a green smoothie that looked like swamp water. She was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, looking the picture of health and vitality. "Morning, Dad," she chirped, not looking up. "Have you seen my pills?" I asked. I left them on the table by the bed. Tiffany turned off the blender. The silence that followed was heavy. She turned to me, tilting her head with that pitying expression she had perfected. "Dad," she said softly, "you did not leave them on the table. You left them in the refrigerator. Again." I stared at her. The refrigerator? I had never put pills in the refrigerator in my life. I walked over to the fridge and pulled it open. There, sitting right next to a carton of almond milk, was my pill bottle. A cold shiver went down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I grabbed the bottle. "Tiff, I didn't put these here." She sighed, wiping her hands on a towel. "Okay, Dad, whatever you say, just maybe write things down? It is getting scary how much you are forgetting." She walked out of the room, leaving me standing there holding the cold plastic bottle. My hands were shaking. I knew I hadn't done it. I knew it. But for a split second, a tiny voice in the back of my head whispered, "What if you did? That is how it starts. That is the seed." By noon, my reading glasses had vanished from the coffee table and reappeared in the trash can. By 2 o'clock, my wallet was missing from my back pocket, only to be found in the freezer. Each time, Tiffany was there. Each time, she would shake her head and whisper to Damon within my earshot, "He is getting worse. It is rapid. We have to do something." I played along. I let them find the wallet. I let them lecture me about safety. But inside, I was cataloging every offense. I was building a case. At 4 o'clock, Tiffany came into the office where I was pretending to watch a soap opera. "Dad," she said, smoothing her hair, "we are having a guest for dinner tonight. Just an old friend of Bob's, Dr. Vance. He is a specialist. We thought he could just meet you, socially." I looked at her. A specialist. She didn't say what kind. She didn't have to. "That sounds nice," I said, making my voice sound thin and eager. "I like meeting new people. Make sure you wear a clean shirt," she added, wrinkling her nose at my flannel. "And try to stay focused. Dr. Vance is a very intelligent man." I waited until she left. Then I went to my duffel bag. I dug past the socks and the underwear until I found a small velvet box. Inside was a fountain pen. It looked like a standard, expensive writing instrument. It was a gift I had received from a private investigator I had helped on a job site 10 years ago. It wasn't just a pen. It was a high-fidelity recording device with a 12-hour battery life. I clipped the pen into the pocket of my shirt. I tested the hidden switch. A tiny, imperceptible vibration told me it was rolling. Bring on the specialist. Dr. Vance arrived at 6 sharp. He was a small, oily man with a comb-over and a suit that cost more than my truck. He had soft hands, hands that had never held a shovel or a hammer, hands that signed papers to lock people away. Bob greeted him like a long-lost brother. They slapped backs and laughed too loudly. Then Bob led him to me. "Zeke, this is Dr. Vance," Bob said. "He is a consulting physician. Just wanted to join us for a meal." Dr. Vance looked at me with eyes that were cold and calculating. "Good evening, Ezekiel. I hear you are having a bit of a rough patch lately." I smiled a lopsided, goofy smile. "Rough patch?" I asked. "No, the road is paved fine. I paved it myself." Dr. Vance exchanged a look with Tiffany. He pulled out a small notebook. Dinner was an interrogation disguised as conversation. We were having roast beef, store-bought, dry as leather. But Dr. Vance wasn't interested in the food. "So, Ezekiel," Dr. Vance said, cutting his meat precisely, "who is the current president of the United States?" I chewed slowly. I knew the answer. I watched the news every morning. But I looked at the ceiling. I scratched my head. "The president?" I mumbled. "Well, it is that actor, isn't it? Reagan? No, wait. The peanut farmer?" Dr. Vance scribbled in his notebook. Tiffany let out a tragic sigh. "And what year is it, Ezekiel?" Vance asked. I squinted at him. "It is 1998? Damon put his head in his hands. I felt a pang of guilt seeing my son so distressed, but then I remembered he was the one who agreed to this charade. He was the one letting them dissect his father's mind for a paycheck. Dr. Vance nodded, tapping his pen. "I see. And Ezekiel, can you count backward from 100 by sevens?" I stared at him blankly. I was good at math. You have to be to frame a house. 93, 86, 79, I could do it in my sleep. 7? I asked. Like, the number? Why would I do that? I picked up my fork and purposely tried to drink from my water glass with the fork. Water spilled down my chin. "Oh my God," Karen whispered. "It is grotesque." Viola was sitting next to me. She went rigid. She reached over and wiped my chin with a napkin. Her touch was gentle, but her grip on the napkin was fierce. She knew what I was doing, but watching me debase myself was hurting her. "It is okay, Zeke," she whispered. Dr. Vance closed his notebook. He didn't even finish his meal. He stood up and signaled for Tiffany and Damon to follow him into the kitchen. I stayed at the table, humming a tuneless melody, acting oblivious, but my hand went to my pocket. I angled my body toward the kitchen door. The pen was recording every whisper. I could hear them clearly. "It is advanced," Dr. Vance said. His voice was clinical, detached. "Significant cognitive decline, disorientation, loss of motor skills. He is not capable of making financial or legal decisions." "But is it enough?" Tiffany asked. "Is it enough to activate the power of attorney immediately?" "More than enough," Vance replied. "I will write the certification tonight. You can file it with the court tomorrow. Once I sign off, he is essentially a ward of the state. You will have full control over his assets." "And the facility?" Damon asked, his voice weak. "Shady Pines?" "I can fast-track the admission," Vance said. "I have a relationship with the director. We can have them picked up tomorrow afternoon." "It is for the best, Damon. He is a danger to himself. Did you see him with the water? He is gone. The father you knew is gone." There was a silence. Then the sound of a handshake. "Thank you, Doctor," Bob said. "We appreciate your discretion." "Any time, Bob. Just make sure the consulting fee is wired by morning." They walked back into the dining room. They looked at me with a mix of pity and triumph. They thought it was over. They thought they had successfully erased a man's life over a dry roast beef dinner. Dr. Vance patted my shoulder. "It was nice meeting you, Ezekiel. You get some rest." I looked up at him. I looked deep into his watery eyes. "You too, Doc," I said. "Be careful driving. The roads are slippery. You never know when you might lose control." He blinked, unsettled by the sudden clarity in my voice, but he brushed it off and left. That night, back in the office, I waited until the house was silent. I took the pen out of my pocket. I plugged it into my old laptop, which I had hidden under the mattress. I put on my headphones and hit play. The audio was crystal clear. He is not capable of making financial or legal decisions. I will write the certification tonight. Make sure the consulting fee is wired. It was all there. Conspiracy, fraud, medical malpractice. Viola sat on the edge of the bed watching me. "Did you get it?" she asked. I took off the headphones. I looked at the file on the screen. It was a weapon more powerful than any gun. "I got it," I said. I looked at the time. It was midnight. The day of the transfer was here. "They are coming for us tomorrow afternoon, Vi," I said. "They want to ship us to Shady Pines." Viola's face hardened. She didn't look scared. She looked like a queen who had just been told the peasants were revolting. "Let them come," she said. I closed the laptop. "Tomorrow," I said. "Tomorrow we don't just survive. Tomorrow we detonate the bomb." I lay back on the lumpy mattress, listening to the hum of the refrigerator through the wall. I thought about the pill bottle inside it. I thought about my wallet in the freezer. They wanted to play games with my mind? Fine. But they forgot one thing. I was a builder. I knew how to spot a crack in the foundation. And Dr. Vance? He was the biggest crack of all. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I was rehearsing my lines for the final act. And trust me, it was going to be an award-winning performance. The next morning I told Tiffany I was going for a walk in the park to feed the pigeons. I put on my old wool coat, the one with the fraying collar that she hated, and grabbed my cane. She barely looked up from her phone. She just waved a manicured hand and told me not to slip on the ice, because she didn't have time to drive me to the emergency room. I walked out the front door, hunched over, shuffling my feet like a man carrying the weight of 80 years. But the moment I turned the corner and was out of sight of the house, I straightened up. I marched 3 blocks east to where I had parked my truck the night before. I climbed into the cab, the cold leather seat feeling like a throne compared to the folding chair in my own office. I didn't go to the park. I didn't have any bread for pigeons. I had a meeting with a shark. I drove 20 minutes to a small, greasy spoon diner on the south side called Harry's. It was the kind of place where the coffee tasted like battery acid, and the waitress called you honey without looking at you. It was also the only place in the city where you could have a conversation without being overheard by the country club crowd. Sitting in the back booth were 2 men. One was Marcus Henderson, my lawyer for 30 years. Marcus was sharp, dressed in a suit that looked older than him but pressed to perfection. The other man was Frank. Frank didn't have a last name that he used. He was a private investigator who used to be a detective until he got tired of the red tape. Frank looked like he had slept in his car, but I knew for a fact he was the best in the business. I slid into the booth opposite them. Marcus didn't smile. Frank just pushed a thick manila envelope across the Formica table. It landed between us with a heavy thud. That sound. It was the sound of a judge's gavel. It was the sound of a coffin lid closing. "You are not going to like this, Zeke," Marcus said, his voice low and grave. "It is worse than we thought. Much worse." I looked at the envelope. I didn't open it immediately. I signaled the waitress for a black coffee. I needed the caffeine to steady my nerves. "Tell me," I said. "Give it to me straight. Is Bob broke?" Frank let out a dry, hacking laugh. "Broke? Zeke? Broke implies he had money and lost it. Bob has been insolvent for 5 years. He is not just broke, he is drowning, and he is trying to use your family as a life raft." I opened the folder. The first page was a summary of Bob's company, something called Apex Horizon Global. The logo looked impressive. The financials did not. "It is a Ponzi scheme," Frank said, pointing a nicotine-stained finger at the numbers. "A classic pyramid. He recruits investors, promises them 20% returns, and pays them off with money from new investors. But the recruitment has dried up. The well is empty. He owes $3 million to private investors, and another $500,000 to the IRS. "The IRS?" I asked, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. Marcus nodded. "They are building a case for tax evasion and wire fraud. It is a federal investigation, Zeke. That is why the banks won't touch him. That is why the bridge loan fell through. He is radioactive." I flipped the page. There were photos. Bob shaking hands with men who looked like they broke kneecaps for a living. Bob entering a casino at 2 a.m. "He is desperate," Frank continued. "The loan sharks are circling. The guys he owes money to, they don't send demand letters. They send guys with baseball bats. That is why he is pushing so hard for your house. He needs a clean asset. He needs something he can liquidate fast to pay off the sharks before they come for his legs." I stared at the picture of Bob laughing in a casino. He was gambling with my life. He was planning to take the house I built for Viola, the house that was supposed to be our sanctuary, and feed it into a slot machine to save his own skin. But that wasn't the worst part. I turned the page again, and my heart stopped. It was a document with a familiar signature at the bottom, a signature I had taught a little boy to write, a signature that used to appear on birthday cards and drawings of superheroes. "Damon. What is this?" I whispered. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Marcus took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "That is a guarantor agreement, Zeke. Damon didn't just agree to help Bob. He signed as a guarantor for one of Bob's shell companies. He used his position at his sales firm to vouch for Bob's credit." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Damon, my son. He wasn't just a victim of Tiffany's manipulation. He was an accomplice. "He committed fraud?" I asked. "Technically, yes," Marcus said. "If Bob goes down, Damon goes down with him. He will lose his job. He will likely face prosecution. And here is the kicker, Zeke. If you sign that house over to Damon today," he paused, looking me dead in the eye. "If you sign that deed the moment the title transfers to Damon, the IRS will place a lien on it. because Damon is already flagged in their system as an associate of Bob. They will seize the house to pay off Bob's tax debt. You won't just lose the house to a mortgage company. You will lose it to the federal government. It will be auctioned off for pennies on the dollar. You will be on the street. Viola will be on the street. And you will never see a dime of that 1.5 million. I sat back in the booth. The diner noise faded away. The clatter of plates, the sizzle of bacon, the chatter of the other patrons. It all became a distant hum. All I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears. They weren't just asking for a loan. They were asking me to commit suicide. They were asking me to hand over 50 years of blood, sweat, and tears to be incinerated in the dumpster fire of Bob's greed. And Damon knew, or at least he suspected. He was willing to sacrifice me and his mother to cover his own tracks. He was willing to throw us into that nursing home, Shady Pines, just to keep himself out of jail for a few more months. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, not from age, from rage. A pure, white-hot rage that burned through the confusion and the hurt. Frank leaned in. "Zeke, you can't sign those papers. You know that, right?" I closed the folder. I smoothed the cover with my palm. "I am not going to sign them," I said. My voice was steady now. It was the voice of the foreman, the voice of the man who fired people for cutting corners. But I am not just going to walk away either. Marcus looked worried. "Zeke, be careful. These are dangerous people. Desperate men do desperate things." I stood up. I threw a $20 bill on the table for the coffee I hadn't touched. "I know, Marcus, but they made one mistake. They thought they were dealing with a senile old man. They forgot that I grew up on these streets before they were paved. They forgot that I know how to pour concrete, and I know how to bury things." I tucked the folder under my arm. It felt like a weapon. "I need you to do one more thing for me, Marcus," I said. "Name it." "I need you to call the IRS agent in charge of Bob's case. Tell him to be at my house tonight. Tell him there is going to be a transaction he might be interested in." Marcus's eyes widened. "Zeke, are you sure? That is the nuclear option. If you do that, there is no going back. Bob goes to prison. Damon might get caught in the blast." I thought about Viola crying on the balcony. I thought about the cold, cramped office where they had shoved us. I thought about the look on Damon's face when he told me it was his turn now. "He made his choice, Marcus," I said. "He chose his wife and her crook father over his own blood. Now he has to live with the consequences." I walked out of the diner and back into the cold. The wind was biting, but I didn't feel it. I felt energized. I felt powerful. I drove back to the house, the folder sitting on the passenger seat next to me. I looked at it every few minutes. It was the key to my freedom. It was the key to my revenge. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw a new car parked there, a sedan with a logo on the side, Prestige Appraisals. The appraiser was here. The game was entering the final quarter. I grabbed my cane and the folder. I slipped the folder inside my coat, buttoning it up tight. I hunched my shoulders. I practiced my shuffle. I walked up the steps, transforming myself back into the confused, helpless Ezekiel. But underneath the wool coat, underneath the act, the heart of a lion was beating. I opened the door. Tiffany was standing in the foyer with a man holding a laser measure. "Oh, there you are, Dad," she exclaimed, checking her watch. "You have been gone a long time. Did you get lost?" I blinked at her, giving her my best vacant stare. "Lost?" I mumbled. "No, just feeding the birds. They were hungry today, Tiff. Very hungry." I looked at the appraiser. He smiled at me condescendingly. "Hi there, sir. Just checking the square footage. Won't be in your way." I smiled back, a wolfish grin that he didn't understand. "Measure carefully, son," I said, patting my chest where the evidence lay hidden. "You want to make sure you get the value right. It is going to be a very expensive night." I shuffled past them, heading for the kitchen. I needed to find Viola. I needed to tell her that the cavalry had arrived, and the cavalry was me. I walked into the kitchen and saw Damon sitting at the island, staring into a cup of coffee. He looked pale. He looked sick. "Hey, Dad," he whispered. I stopped. I looked at the back of his head. I wanted to reach out and touch his shoulder. I wanted to tell him it would be okay, but I couldn't, because it wouldn't be okay. He had signed his name on the devil's contract, and tonight the devil was coming to collect. "Did you have a nice walk?" he asked, not turning around. I gripped my cane. "It was educational, Damon," I said, Very educational. I went into the office and closed the door. Viola was sitting on the bed, holding her rosary beads. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with fear. Zeke? I pulled the folder out of my coat and tossed it onto the plastic table. Pack your bags, V, I said. She stood up. Are we leaving? No, I said, taking her hand. We are staying. But they are going on a long trip. I opened the folder and showed her the first photo. Her hand flew to her mouth. Tonight, I said. Tonight we take back our house. Tonight we take back our dignity. The investigation was over. The trial was about to begin, and I was the judge, jury, and executioner. The invasion began at 4 in the afternoon. That is what it felt like. It wasn't a party preparation. It was a hostile takeover. Catering trucks blocked the driveway, unloading trays of hors d'oeuvres that cost more than my first car. A team of florists dragged in massive arrangements of white lilies and silver branches, turning my warm, inviting living room into something that looked like the lobby of a frozen hotel. Tiffany was the general of this chaotic army, barking orders into her phone, her voice shrill and panicked. She was wearing a sequin dress that shimmered like fish scales, and she looked ready to kill anyone who stepped on her hem. I was sitting in the kitchen, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, trying to stay out of the way. Viola was beside me, polishing silverware. It was the only thing they let her do. They didn't trust her to cook for their high society friends. They said her food was too rustic, too homey. They wanted foam and emulsions and things you couldn't pronounce. Then, Tiffany marched into the kitchen. She wasn't alone. She was carrying a bundle of black fabric. She dropped it on the table in front of us. The pile of clothes looked cheap, polyester, shiny and stiff. "We have a problem," Tiffany announced, not bothering to make eye contact. "The staffing agency messed up. They sent 2 fewer servers than I ordered. I have 50 people coming in 2 hours, and I have no one to pass the champagne and the canapes." She looked at me, then at Viola. Her eyes swept over us with a calculating coldness that made my skin crawl. "You two need to help," she said. Viola stopped polishing the fork. She looked at the black clothes, then up at Tiffany. "Help?" Viola asked softly. "You want us to greet the guests?" Tiffany let out a short, sharp laugh. "Greet the guests? Oh, God, no. Mom, look at you. Your hair is a mess and that dress is from last season. Number 1, I need you to serve." She pointed a manicured finger at the pile of clothes. "Put these on. White shirts, black vests, black pants. I need you to circulate with the trays. Keep the glasses full. Clear the empty plates. And for heaven's sake, do not engage in conversation. Just smile, nod, and move. If anyone asks, you are just helping out." There was a silence in the kitchen that was heavier than concrete. I felt the blood rushing to my face, hot and fast. This was my house. I paid the mortgage. I paid the electric bill that was powering her party lights. And she wanted me to dress up like a servant and wait on her friends? Viola stood up. She was trembling. Her dignity, usually so unshakable, was cracking under the weight of this insult. "Tiffany," she said, her voice shaking, "I am your mother-in-law. This is my home. You cannot ask me to wear a uniform and serve your friends. It is humiliating." Tiffany's face hardened. She took a step closer to Viola, looming over her. "Humiliating? You want to know what is humiliating, Viola? Living in a house you can't afford to maintain. Being a burden on your children. That is humiliating. We are trying to save this family's future tonight. My father is bringing in investors who can change everything for us. For Damon. If you care about your son, you will put on the damn vest and make yourself useful. Or would you rather go sit in the garage in the freezing cold until the party is over? Because those are your options." I saw Viola's hand twitch. She wanted to slap her. I wanted her to slap her. But then I remembered the plan. I remembered the recording pen in my pocket. I remembered the IRS agent who was going to be lurking outside later that night. We needed to be invisible. And what is more invisible than a waiter? People say things in front of servants they would never say in front of family. They drop their guard. They spill secrets along with their wine. I reached out and grabbed the polyester vest. It felt rough against my calloused fingers. "It is okay, Vi," I said, making my voice sound defeated and tired. "Zeke?" She looked at me, betrayed. "Put it on," I whispered, leaning close to her ear so Tiffany couldn't hear. "Put it on. We are going to watch the show. We are going to have the best seats in the house. Trust me. Viola searched my eyes. She saw the fire burning deep behind the resignation. She took a deep breath, swallowed her pride, and picked up the white shirt. Fine, she said to Tiffany. We will do it. For Damon. Good, Tiffany snapped, checking her reflection in the oven door. Be ready in 20 minutes. And Dad, try not to drool on the guests. I waited until she left the room. Then I stood up and started unbuttoning my flannel shirt. Why, Zeke? Viola hissed. Why are we doing this? Because, I said, buttoning the stiff, cheap collar of the waiter's shirt. Tonight, they are going to sell a lie, and I want to be there to pour the wine when they choke on it. Half an hour later, the house was full. The noise was deafening. A jazz band was playing in the corner. Not good jazz, but generic, soulless elevator music. The air smelled of expensive cologne and greed. I stood by the bar, a silver tray in my hand balanced with crystal flutes of champagne. The uniform was tight across my shoulders. The bow tie felt like a noose. I looked like a caricature of myself. But no one looked at me. To them, I was just a pair of hands holding a drink. I moved through the crowd. I recognized some of the faces. There was the local councilman who was always under investigation. There was the real estate developer who had cut corners on the downtown project. And there were Bob's investors, men with shiny suits and hungry eyes, looking for a quick return. I offered a glass to a woman in a fur coat. She took it without looking at me, continuing her conversation. So, Bob tells me the son owns the property now, she said to her companion. Free and clear. Yes, the man replied, sipping the drink. Prime location. If the collateral is solid, the bridge loan is a no-brainer. We can leverage this place for at least $2 million. I moved away, a grim smile playing on my lips. They were already counting my money. They were carving up my carcass before I was even dead. I made my way to the center of the room, near the fireplace. Bob was holding court there. He was wearing a tuxedo that strained at the buttons. He held a cigar in one hand and a glass of cognac in the other. He looked like a king. Damon was standing next to him, looking uncomfortable in a suit that was too slim for him. He was sweating. He kept glancing around the room, as if he expected the police to burst in. Gentlemen, Bob boomed, his voice carrying over the music. Welcome to the Robinson estate, or should I say, the future headquarters of our new venture. The men around him laughed politely. My son-in-law Damon has graciously offered this magnificent home as the cornerstone of our new fund, Bob continued, clapping a heavy hand on Damon's shoulder. Damon flinched. He is a visionary. He knows that in business, you have to use every asset you have. Visionary. Damon looked like he was about to vomit. I stepped forward. My tray was empty, except for a bottle of red wine. It was a bottle of Bordeaux I had been saving for 10 years. Tiffany must have raided the cellar. Bob's glass was empty. He noticed me standing there. He didn't see Zeke, the man who had lent him money 5 years ago. He didn't see the grandfather of his daughter's imaginary children. He saw a server. Fill it up, he commanded, thrusting his glass at me without turning his head. I stepped closer. My hand was steady. I poured the wine. The dark red liquid swirled in the glass. I poured it perfectly, stopping just before the rim. Bob turned to look at me then. He looked at my white hair, my waiter's uniform, my bowed head. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by a cruel, amused smirk. Well, look at that, he announced to the group. We have got the former owner helping out tonight. Now that is what I call a family business. Everyone pitches in. The men chuckled. One of them, a guy with a gold tooth, looked at me with disdain. Bit old for a waiter, isn't he? Bob laughed, a wet, hacking sound. Oh, he needs to stay busy. Keeps the dementia at bay. Right, Zeke? I didn't answer. I just held the bottle. Bob leaned in closer to me. The smell of alcohol and stale tobacco on his breath was overpowering. He tapped the side of the wine glass with his thick ring finger. Careful there, old man, he sneered, his voice dropping so only the circle could hear. Don't spill a drop. That bottle costs more than your monthly pension. Try not to shake so much. We wouldn't want to stain the carpet before we sell the place, would we? I froze. The insult hung in the air. It wasn't just about the money. It was the dismissal of my entire existence. He was telling me that a fermented grape juice was worth more than the 40 years of labor I had given to the world. I looked at his neck. It was thick and red. I imagined tightening the bow tie around it. But then I saw Viola across the room. She was holding a tray of empty crab shells. She was looking at me. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Not yet. I took a deep breath. I lowered the bottle. Yes, sir, I mumbled, forcing the words through gritted teeth. Very expensive. I will be careful. Good boy, Bob said, turning his back on me. Now, gentlemen, let's talk about the buy-in. The minimum tier is $50,000. I backed away, fading into the crowd. I walked towards the kitchen, my heart pounding a war drum against my ribs. I walked past Damon. He caught my eye. For a second, I saw shame. Deep, burning shame. He looked at my uniform, then at his own expensive suit. He opened his mouth to say something. Maybe I am sorry. Maybe, Dad, stop. But Tiffany appeared at his elbow, whispering something in his ear, and he looked away. He chose his side. I pushed through the swinging door into the kitchen. I set the wine bottle down on the counter with a thud. I looked at the recording pen in my pocket. The light was blinking. It had caught everything. The claim of ownership, the solicitation of funds based on fraud, the coercion. Viola came up beside me. She put a hand on my back. Did you hear him? She asked softly. I heard him, I said. He thinks he is a king. Viola picked up a fresh tray of appetizers. Kings fall, Zeke, she said, especially the ones who build their thrones on ice. I looked at the clock on the oven. 8 p.m. The guests were here. The victims were here. The stage was set. I took off the bow tie. I unbuttoned the top button of the choking white shirt. I am done serving, bye, I said. She looked at me. Where are you going? To the front door, I said. I think our real guest has just arrived. I walked out of the kitchen, not as a waiter, but as the owner of the house. I walked through the crowd, ignoring Tiffany's glare, ignoring Bob's loud laughter. I walked straight to the front door. I could see the headlights through the frosted glass. Blue and red lights, reflecting off the snow. Silent, but unmistakable. I opened the door. The cold air rushed in, cleansing the stench of the party. Standing on the porch wasn't a guest. It was a man in a windbreaker with a badge on his belt, and behind him, 2 uniformed officers. Can I help you, gentlemen? I asked, my voice strong and clear. Mr. Ezekiel Robinson? The agent asked. That is me, I said. We received a tip about significant financial irregularities involving a Mr. Robert Miller and a Mr. Damon Robinson. We have a warrant to secure records and freeze assets. I stepped aside, holding the door wide open. You are right on time, I said. The party is just getting started. Come on in. The wine is expensive, but the entertainment? The entertainment is going to be free. The last guest stumbled out into the snow shortly after 11 o'clock. The house was finally quiet, but it was the silence of a battlefield after the cannons have stopped firing. The air was thick with the smell of stale champagne, expensive perfume, and the lingering scent of desperation. I was in the kitchen, unbuttoning that suffocating waiter's vest. My back ached. My feet were swollen. I felt every single one of my 73 years, and a few extra ones I had picked up tonight. Viola was already in the small office room, praying. I could hear the murmur of her voice through the thin wall. I was just about to pour myself a glass of water from the tap when the kitchen door swung open. It was Damon. He looked like a man who had gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight champion and lost every single one. His tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck like a noose. His eyes were red, rimmed with dark circles that hadn't been there a week ago. He smelled of scotch and fear. Dad, he said, his voice cracking, can you come into the study for a minute? We need to talk. The study. He meant the room that used to be the library, the room where I had taught him to play chess. Now it was Bob's cigar lounge. I looked at him. I saw the tremor in his hands. I saw the sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill in the house. Sure, son, I said, leaning heavily on my cane. Is everything okay? He didn't answer. He just turned and walked away, expecting me to follow. I shuffled after him, my cane tapping a slow, rhythmic beat on the hardwood floors. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of a clock counting down. When we entered the study, I saw them. The vultures were already roosting. Bob was sitting in my favorite leather chair, nursing a drink. Tiffany was leaning against the mahogany desk, her arms crossed, her foot tapping impatiently against the leg of the table. They stopped talking the moment I walked in. Damon motioned for me to sit in the small guest chair opposite the desk. It was lower than the others, designed to make the person sitting in it feel small. I lowered myself into it with a grunt of exertion. Damon sat on the edge of the desk, uncomfortably close to me. He took a deep breath, and then, as if someone had shouted action on a movie set, the tears started. It wasn't a silent cry. It was a performance. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving. "Dad, I am in trouble," he sobbed. "I am in so much trouble." I watched him. I had seen men cry before. I had seen ironworkers cry when they lost a finger. I had seen families cry when their loans were denied. Those were real tears. They were ugly. They were messy. Damon's tears were too clean. They were glycerin drops on a perfectly moisturized face. "What is it, Damon?" I asked, keeping my voice filled with fatherly concern. "Is it the job?" He looked up, his eyes swimming. "It is the business, Dad. The market." It shifted. We overextended. I made some bad calls trying to secure a future for Tiffany, for the grandkids you always wanted. Grandkids. He was playing the legacy card. He knew that was my weak spot. Or at least, it used to be. I need liquidity, Dad, just for a few weeks. The bank is holding up my funds because of a clerical error. If I don't show proof of assets by tomorrow morning, I lose everything. The company, the reputation. We will be destitute. He reached out and grabbed my hand. His palm was clammy. "I need you to help me, Dad. I need you to sign a temporary guarantor agreement." He reached behind him and picked up a document that was lying on the desk. It was thick, stapled at the top. He flipped to the last page. "It just says that the house is collateral for 30 days, he explained, speaking fast, the words tumbling out over each other. "Just 30 days. Once the bank clears my funds, we tear this up. It is just a formality. A piece of paper to show the underwriters." I looked at the paper. I looked at the bold text at the top of the page. Even without my reading glasses, even in the dim light of the study, I knew that shape. I had been in real estate and construction for 50 years. I knew what a deed looked like. This wasn't a guarantor agreement. It was a quitclaim deed. If I signed this, I wasn't lending him the house. I was giving it to him. I was relinquishing all rights, titles, and interests in the property. I would be a trespasser in my own home the second the ink dried. And he knew it. He was lying to my face. He was looking me in the eye, holding my hand, and trying to steal the roof over his mother's head. I felt a crack in my heart. It wasn't a metaphorical crack. It felt physical, like a rib snapping. This was the boy I had carried on my shoulders. This was the boy I had taught to ride a bike. And now, he was just a thief in a suit. I looked up at Tiffany. She was staring at me with the intensity of a hawk watching a field mouse. Bob was pretending to look at his drink, but his ears were pricked up. I don't understand legal stuff, Damon," I mumbled, making my hand tremble in his grasp. "Collateral? That sounds dangerous. What if you can't pay?" Damon squeezed my hand tighter. "I will pay, Dad. I swear on my life. I have the money. It is just frozen. Please. Do you trust me?" That was the question. Do you trust me? I looked at him. No, I didn't trust him. I trusted the man he used to be, but that man was dead. "I trust you, son," I lied. My voice shook, not with age, but with the effort of saying those words. Damon let out a breath he had been holding. He uncapped a heavy, expensive fountain pen. He pressed it into my shaking hand. "Just sign right there, Dad, on the line next to the X." I looked at the line. It was a straight, black line. It looked like the edge of a cliff. I moved the pen toward the paper. My hand was shaking violently now. I wasn't faking the tremor anymore. The rage inside me was vibrating through my bones. I wanted to stab the pen into the desk. I wanted to tear the paper into confetti and throw it in their faces. But I couldn't. Not yet. The IRS agent was outside, but he needed the intent to be clear. He needed the timestamp to match the wire fraud investigation, and I needed to make them sweat. I needed to see how desperate they really were. The tip of the pen hovered over the paper. Tiffany took a step forward. She couldn't help herself. She was leaning in, her eyes wide, practically willing the ink onto the page. "Do it, Dad," she whispered. "Just sign it." Bob shifted in his chair. The ice in his glass clinked. I touched the pen to the paper. A tiny dot of ink appeared. Then, I gasped. I squeezed my eyes shut and let the pen slip from my fingers. It clattered onto the desk and rolled off the edge, hitting the floor with a soft thud. "Damn it!" I cried out. rubbing my eyes with the palms of my hands. Damon jumped. "Dad? What is it?" "My eyes," I groaned. "It is these damn cataracts. Everything just went blurry. I can't see the line. I can't see anything. It is like a fog." I blinked rapidly, looking around the room as if I were blind. "Where is the line?" I asked, panicking. "Did I sign it?" Damon scrambled to pick up the pen. "No, Dad, you didn't sign it yet. Here, I will guide your hand." "No." I pulled my hand back, clutching it to my chest. "I can't sign what I can't see, Damon. You know the rule. Measure twice, cut once. I never sign anything unless I read it 3 times. Tiffany let out a sound that was half growl, half scream. "Oh, for God's sake, just make an X. It doesn't have to be perfect." I turned my head toward her voice. "Tiffany? Why are you shouting? My head hurts. I need my drops." I stood up, swaying on my feet. "I need to go to bed. I need to rest my eyes." Damon stood up, blocking my path. "Dad, wait." "We can't wait. The bank deadline is 9 a.m. We have to fax this tonight. Just try again. Please." I looked at him. He was desperate. He was terrified. "Good. I can't, son," I said, my voice firm but frail. "If I sign it wrong, the bank will reject it anyway. You know how they are about signatures. Let me sleep. My eyes are always better in the morning. I will sign it at breakfast, first thing." I patted his cheek. His skin was cold and damp. "Don't worry, Damon. It will all be over tomorrow." I saw the look that passed between the 3 of them. It was a look of pure panic. But they couldn't force me, not physically, not without leaving bruises, and they needed me compliant. Bob stood up, putting a hand on Damon's shoulder. "Let him sleep, Damon. He is right. If the signature is shaky, the underwriters might flag it. 7 a.m. sharp, Zeke, before coffee." 7 a.m., I agreed. I shuffled toward the door. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. I could feel the heat of their anger. When I reached the doorway, I turned back one last time. "Damon," I said. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Yeah, Dad?" "You really should fix that foundation on the north side," I said. "I saw a crack today. If you don't patch it, the whole house might come down." Damon looked confused. "What? There is no crack." "There is always a crack, son," I said. "You just have to know where to look." I walked out of the study and closed the door behind me. I didn't go to the bathroom. I went straight to the small office. Viola was waiting. She had packed 2 small bags. She looked at me. "Did you sign?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, I bought us 12 hours. I sat down on the bed and pulled out my phone. I sent a text message to the number Frank, the investigator, had given me. It was short, just 3 words. "Morning, 7 a.m. The reply came back instantly. "We will be ready." I lay down next to my wife in the narrow bed. I held her hand in the dark. "Try to sleep, Vi," I whispered. She squeezed my hand. "I can't sleep, Zeke. I keep thinking about Damon. How did we raise him to be like this?" "We raised him to be hungry," I said, staring at the ceiling. "We just forgot to teach him what to eat. And now he is trying to eat us." "But he won't," Viola said fiercely. "No," I said, "he won't. Because tomorrow morning, he is going to bite down on something he can't swallow." The house was quiet again, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a trap that had been set, the spring coiled tight, waiting for the mouse to take the cheese. And tomorrow morning, at 7 a.m., the trap would snap. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 2 a.m., but sleep was a luxury I could not afford. I lay in the dark, on the uncomfortable mattress in the home office, staring at the ceiling fan that was covered in a thick layer of dust. Next to me, Viola's breathing was shallow and uneven. I knew she was awake too. We were 2 old soldiers lying in a foxhole, waiting for the enemy to charge at dawn. The deadline was 7 a.m., 5 hours. 5 hours until I had to put a pen to paper or reveal my hand. I needed water. My throat felt like I had swallowed a handful of sand. I sat up slowly, my joints popping in the silence. I placed my feet on the cold floorboards. I didn't reach for my cane. The rubber tip made a squeaking sound on the hardwood, and tonight, silence was my only armor. I walked barefoot, using the walls to guide me. The house was dark, stripped of the party decorations from hours before. It felt hollow. It felt like a stage set after the actors had gone home. I crept into the kitchen. The moonlight filtered through the windows, illuminating the granite countertops where earlier Bob had leaned and laughed at my expense. I poured a glass of tap water and drank it standing by the sink. I looked out into the backyard. The snow was falling again, covering the tracks of the catering trucks, covering the footprints of the police agent who had visited earlier. Then I heard it, a voice, low, muffled. It wasn't coming from upstairs. It was coming from the mudroom, the small entryway that connected the kitchen to the garage. It was a place where we used to stack muddy boots and wet coats, a place for dirty things. I froze. Was it Tiffany? Was it Bob making a late-night call to his loan sharks? I set the glass down on a dish towel so it wouldn't make a sound. I moved toward the mudroom door, which was cracked open just an inch. The voice became clearer. It was Damon. But it wasn't the Damon I had seen in the study earlier. It wasn't the weeping, terrified son begging for his father's help. It wasn't the beaten-down husband cowering before his wife. This voice was smooth, arrogant. It was the voice of a man who thought he had already won. I leaned in, pressing my ear to the gap in the doorframe. "Don't worry, baby," Damon whispered. "It is done. The old man is going to sign at breakfast. I played him like a fiddle. I even cried a little. You should have seen it. It was Oscar-worthy." I felt a cold hand squeeze my heart. He was bragging. He was laughing about my tears. A pause. He was listening to someone on the other end. I know, he said, his tone turning soothing, seductive. "I miss you too, but we have to be patient. Just a few more days. Once the deed is recorded, I get the loan. Once the loan clears, I have liquidity." Another pause. Then a dark chuckle. "Tiffany?" Damon laughed. He sounded cruel. "Tiffany is a useful idiot. She thinks this is about saving her dad's company. She thinks she is the mastermind. Let her think that. As soon as the money hits the account, I am filing for divorce. I have already spoken to a lawyer. I am going to blindside her." I gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. My knees buckled. This wasn't just greed. This was a level of sociopathy I didn't know existed in my own bloodline. He wasn't just using me. He was using Tiffany. He was using Bob. He was playing everyone against everyone. "Yeah," Damon continued. "We will kick the old folks out tomorrow. Shady Pines is expecting them at noon. And Tiffany? I will give her 30 days to vacate. And then it is just you and me, baby. In the big house, just like I promised. We can finally get rid of that ugly furniture and start fresh." He was talking to a mistress, a woman I didn't know, a woman he was planning to move into my wife's home, into the bed where I had slept for 40 years. I listened as he described the life they would have. He talked about buying a new Porsche. He talked about vacations in Cabo. He talked about how easy it was to manipulate me because I was just a sentimental old fool. "He is pathetic, really," Damon said. "He actually believed the crack in the foundation story. He is so desperate to be needed. It is sad. But hey, his loss is our gain. I love you too, Jessica. I will see you tomorrow night. Keep the champagne on ice." The call ended. I heard the beep of the phone. Then, the sound of a deep, satisfied sigh. I backed away from the door. I moved as fast as my old legs would carry me, back through the kitchen, back into the shadows of the hallway. I didn't want him to see me. If I confronted him now, I would kill him. I mean that literally. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the overwhelming urge to wrap my fingers around his throat and squeeze until the arrogance drained out of his eyes. I made it back to the office just as I heard the mudroom door creak open. I slid into the bed and pulled the covers up to my chin. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I lay there, staring into the darkness. For days I had been telling myself that Damon was weak, that he was a victim of a shark-like wife and a crook father-in-law. I had wanted to believe that if I removed Tiffany and Bob, my son would return to me. I had wanted to save him, but now I knew the truth. The rot wasn't just on the surface. It wasn't just an infection from the outside. The rot was in the bone. Damon wasn't a victim. He was the architect. He was worse than them because he was betraying his own blood. Tiffany and Bob were just greedy strangers. Damon was family, and he was planning to discard us like trash so he could play house with his mistress. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It was hot and salty. It was the last tear I would ever shed for my son. Beside me, Viola stirred. She reached out and touched my arm. "Zeke," she whispered, "you are shaking. What is wrong?" I couldn't tell her. I couldn't tell her that the boy she nursed, The boy she prayed for every night was a monster. It would break her, and I needed her strong for tomorrow. Nothing, Vi, I whispered back, my voice hard as granite. Just a draft. Go back to sleep. She settled back down, but she kept her hand on my arm. I looked at the ceiling. The plan I had formed with the lawyer and the investigator was good. It was going to stop the sale. It was going to expose the fraud. But it wasn't enough anymore. Stopping them wasn't enough. Saving the house wasn't enough. I needed to destroy them. I needed to burn their world down so completely that they would never be able to build it back up. I needed to make sure that when Damon walked out of this house tomorrow, he wouldn't just be homeless. He would be ruined. No job, no reputation, no mistress, no future. I thought about the cracked foundation he had lied about. There is always a crack, son, I had told him. He was the crack, and I was about to bring the sledgehammer. I closed my eyes. The image of my son's face floated in my mind. The little boy who used to look at me with hero worship. I took that image, wrapped it in a mental shroud, and buried it deep in the graveyard of my memories. That boy was dead. The man upstairs was a stranger, and strangers don't get mercy. The clock struck 3. 4 hours left. I lay there, plotting. I refined the trap. I added spikes to the pit. I sharpened the stakes. When the sun came up, I wouldn't be Zeke the father. I wouldn't be Zeke the husband. I would be Ezekiel Robinson, the man who built this town. And I was about to show them why you never, ever try to evict the landlord. Sleep tight, Damon. Enjoy your dreams of Cabo and Jessica, because when you wake up, you are going to be living in a nightmare. The morning sun on the day of the transfer rose pale and cold over Chicago, but I was already awake. I was sitting in the front seat of my truck, parked down the block, drinking coffee from a thermos. The house was quiet. The enemy was sleeping, dreaming of the wealth they thought they were about to inherit. They didn't know that the bank vault was already closing. I picked up my phone. It was time to make the call that would cut the umbilical cord. For 10 years, I had allowed Damon and Tiffany to use secondary cards linked to my primary business account. It started as a way to help them with groceries when Damon was starting out. Then it became gas, then vacations, then designer clothes. I had watched the statements balloon from a few $100s a month to 10, sometimes 15,000. I paid it without complaint because I thought I was helping my family. I thought I was being a provider. Now I realized I was just funding my own execution. I dialed the private client number for my bank. The representative answered on the first ring. "Good morning, Mr. Robinson. How can we help you today?" I looked at the house through the windshield. "Morning, Sarah," I said. "I need to make a security adjustment. I want to report compromised activity on all secondary cards linked to the Robinson Trust. Specifically, the cards issued to Damon Robinson and Tiffany Robinson." "Compromised, sir?" Sarah asked. "Have they been stolen?" I took a sip of black coffee. "In a manner of speaking," I said. "I believe the users are engaging in unauthorized transactions. I want a total freeze, immediate decline on all charges, no overrides. And Sarah, if they call, tell them it is a system error pending the account holder's verification. Consider it done, Mr. Robinson. Anything else?" "Yes," I said. "Transfer the liquid cash from the operating account to the holding company I set up yesterday. Leave the personal checking account with exactly $100. Done." I hung up. It was 6:15 in the morning. The trap was armed. I drove the truck back up the driveway and parked it. I walked into the house, my cane tapping softly on the floor, and went back to the small office to wait. The morning played out exactly as I expected. Damon left first, rushing out the door in his tailored suit, late for a meeting with the bridge loan officers. He looked confident. He thought the signed deed was a formality that would happen later that day. Tiffany left an hour later, dressed in yoga pants and oversized sunglasses, heading to her weekly appointment at the most expensive spa in the Gold Coast. I sat at the kitchen table with Viola, eating oatmeal. "It is quiet," Viola whispered. "It is the calm before the storm," I replied. "Eat up, Vi. You are going to need your strength for the second act." At 10:30, the first bomb went off. Tiffany was lying on a massage table at the Aurelia Spa. I know the place because I have paid the bills for it for 5 years. She had just finished a $300 diamond dust facial and a deep tissue massage. She was feeling relaxed, entitled, and rich. She walked to the front desk, her skin glowing, and handed the receptionist the platinum card with my name on the account, but her name on the plastic. I wasn't there, but I can see it perfectly. The receptionist swiped the card. A frown. A second swipe. A polite clearing of the throat. "I am sorry, Mrs. Robinson. The card has been declined." Tiffany would have laughed. "Declined? That is impossible. It is an unlimited account. Try it again. You probably swiped it wrong." The receptionist tried again. Then she tried the chip. Then she typed the numbers manually. "It is a hard decline, ma'am. It says contact issuer. Do you have another form of payment?" Tiffany didn't have another form of payment. She never carried cash. Her own personal cards were maxed out. She was standing in the lobby of an elite spa, surrounded by the wives of senators and CEOs, unable to pay for the oil on her face. I imagined the color draining from her cheeks. I imagined the stammering, the panic. She had to call Damon. But Damon was having a bad morning too. He had pulled his Porsche into a gas station near the highway. He was running on fumes. He inserted the card to fill up with premium. See cashier. He probably swore, thinking the pump was broken. He walked inside, annoyed, throwing the card on the counter. 20 on pump 5. And hurry up, I am late. The cashier, a kid making minimum wage who didn't care about Damon's suit, swiped the card. Declined, buddy. Damon would have frozen. What do you mean declined? Run it again. I ran it 3 times. It is dead. You got cash? Damon patted his pockets. He had nothing. He had to walk back to his $80,000 car, get in, and pray he had enough gas to make it home. He didn't. At 11:15, my phone didn't ring, but the front door slammed open so hard I thought the glass would shatter. They were back. I stayed in my chair, slowly bringing a spoonful of oatmeal to my mouth. My hand trembled just enough to spill a little milk on the table. Damon stormed into the kitchen first. He was sweating, his hair messier than usual. He looked like a man who had been chased by wolves. Tiffany was right behind him, her face blotchy with rage, her mascara running slightly from the tears of humiliation. "Dad!" Damon screamed. I looked up, blinking slowly. "Damon? You are home early. Did you get the loan?" "Loan?" Damon slammed his hands on the table, making the bowls jump. "The cards are dead, Dad, all of them. I was stranded at a gas station. I had to beg a stranger for $5 of gas just to get back here." Tiffany pushed past him. "I was at the spa," she shrieked. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? They held me there for 20 minutes like a common shoplifter until Bob had to come pay the bill. What did you do?" I looked from one to the other. I put down my spoon. I made my face a mask of utter confusion. "The cards?" I asked, my voice wavering. "What do you mean dead?" "I used that card, when was it? Last week? To buy my medicine." "They are frozen," Damon yelled. "The bank said it was a security freeze initiated by the account holder. That is you." "Did you call the bank?" I scratched my head, furrowing my brow. "Call the bank?" I mumbled. "Well, I did call someone this morning, or was that yesterday? I was trying to order that specialized dog food for the neighbor. Maybe I dialed the wrong number. You know how small those buttons are. You dialed the bank and reported fraud by accident," Tiffany screamed. "How is that even possible?" I shrugged, looking helpless. "I don't know, Tiff. My mind, it is like Swiss cheese these days. I thought I was calling the pharmacy. Maybe I pressed the panic button." "Did I press the panic button?" Damon groaned, dragging his hands down his face. "Oh my God. He is totally gone. He locked the accounts by mistake." He pulled out his phone. "Fix it, Dad. Call them right now and unfreeze them. I have the loan officer calling in an hour for the application fee. I need that card working." I reached for the phone, my hands shaking violently. I held it upside down for a moment before correcting it. Okay, I said. "Don't shout. I will call them. Who do I call again? Is it Mr. Jenkins? Or, wait, Mr. Jenkins died in '95. Just give me the phone." Damon snatched it from my hand. "I will dial. What is the passcode?" I stared at him blankly. "The passcode, Dad, for the telephone banking." I wrote it down somewhere," I said, patting my empty pockets. "It was on a yellow sticky note. Or was it pink?" Damon looked like he was going to have a stroke. He threw the phone back onto the table. It slid across and hit the butter dish. "Useless!" he shouted. "He is absolutely useless." Tiffany was pacing the kitchen floor like a caged tiger. "We need cash, Damon. We need that application fee for the loan or the whole deal collapses. If we don't get the title transferred and the loan approved by 5 p.m., my dad goes to jail." Bob walked in then. He looked grayer than usual. He had just paid Tiffany's spa bill with the last of his own hidden cash reserve.
"What is happening?" Bob demanded.
"Why is the money cut off? Your senile friend here froze the accounts," Damon spat, "and he can't remember the password to unlock them." Bob looked at me. His eyes narrowed. For a second I thought he saw through the act. I thought he saw the predator behind the prey. "Zeke," Bob said slowly, "try to remember. The password. It is usually a birthday or an anniversary." I looked at Bob. "Is it?" I asked innocently. "Maybe it is your birthday, Bob. When is your birthday again?" Bob slammed his fist into the wall. "We don't have time for this," Bob yelled. "The IRS is auditing my books tomorrow morning. I need that bridge loan today." Damon turned to me, his eyes wild. "The deed," he said. "Forget the cards. If we have the deed, the bank will front us the cash directly. We don't need the credit cards if we own the house." He ran out of the room and came back seconds later with the quitclaim deed he had tried to get me to sign the night before. He slapped it onto the sticky oatmeal table. "Sign it," he commanded. "Sign it now." I looked at the paper. I looked at the pen he offered. This was the moment. The cards were frozen. Their liquidity was gone. They were desperate. If I signed this, they thought they won. If I didn't, the violence might start. I picked up the pen. "I am hungry," I said petulantly. "I can't write when I am hungry." And you yelled at me. Damon looked ready to strangle me. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. "I am sorry, Dad," he said through gritted teeth. "I am sorry I yelled. Please, just sign the paper. Then we can go get ice cream. Whatever you want." "Ice cream," I repeated softly. "I like butter pecan." "Yes," Damon said. "Butter pecan. Gallons of it. Just sign." I lowered the pen to the paper. I made a mark, a shaky, illegible scrawl that looked nothing like my name. "There," I said, dropping the pen. Damon snatched the paper up. He looked at the scribble. It will have to do," he muttered. "I can get it notarized. I know a guy." He looked at Tiffany and Bob. "We are back in business. I am going to the title office. Tiff, you pack their bags. As soon as this is recorded, I want them out. I don't care if Shady Pines isn't ready. Drop them at a motel if you have to. Just get them out of my house. My house." He ran out the door with the paper. Bob followed him. Tiffany stood there, looking at me and Viola. She smiled. It was a cruel, twisted smile. "You heard him," she said. "Go pack your trash. You are leaving." I looked at Viola. She didn't flinch. I stood up, wiping the oatmeal from my mouth with a napkin. "Don't worry, Tiffany," I said, my voice suddenly dropping the senile tremor. "We are packing. We wouldn't want to be here when the storm hits." She frowned, confused by the sudden change in my tone. "What storm? It is sunny outside." I walked past her, leaning in close. "The financial one," I whispered. I left her standing in the kitchen, staring at my back. She didn't know it yet, but she was standing in the ruins of her life. Damon was running to the title office with a document I had signed with my left hand, on a property that didn't technically belong to me anymore, because I had moved it to the trust 3 days ago. He was running a race he had already lost. And I was going upstairs to put on my suit. The game was over. It was time for the victory lap. The 23rd of December dawned with a sky the color of a bruised plum. The wind coming off Lake Michigan was screaming, rattling the window panes of the small office where Viola and I had spent another restless night. Inside the house, the atmosphere was even colder than the blizzard outside. Since the credit cards had been frozen the day before, the dynamic had shifted from arrogance to sheer unadulterated panic. The bridge loan was stalled. The application fee had not been paid. The sharks were circling Bob, and he was sweating through his expensive shirts. I sat at the kitchen table nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold. My hands were wrapped around the mug, not for warmth, but to keep them from shaking with rage. I watched them. Damon was pacing the length of the kitchen island, his phone pressed to his ear, leaving frantic voicemails for loan officers, who were probably already on holiday break. Tiffany was sitting on a bar stool, scrolling through her phone, her face pinched and gray without her usual layers of expensive makeup. Bob and Karen were arguing in hushed tones by the refrigerator. They looked like rats on a sinking ship. They were snapping at each other, blaming each other, but mostly they were looking at me with eyes full of hatred. To them, I was the iceberg that had torn a hole in their hull. I was the senile old fool who had accidentally frozen their lifeline. I decided it was time to throw them a rope they would use to hang themselves. I cleared my throat. The sound was loud in the tense silence. Damon stopped pacing. He looked at me with a mixture of exhaustion and annoyance. "What is it, Dad?" he snapped. "Do you need more oatmeal?" I shook my head slowly, giving him a watery, apologetic smile. "No, son, I do not need oatmeal. I have been thinking." Tiffany let out a scoff without looking up. "That is dangerous," she muttered. I ignored her. I focused my gaze on my son, the boy I had taught to walk, the man who was planning to replace his mother with a mistress. "I have been thinking about what you said yesterday," I continued, making my voice sound thin and frail. "About the house, about the future." The room went deadly silent. Bob stopped whispering to Karen. Damon lowered his phone. "What about it, Dad?" Damon asked, stepping closer. I looked down at my hands, rubbing the knuckles that were swollen from years of laying bricks. "I do not want to be a burden, Damon. I know I am getting old. I know I forget things like the bank password. I do not want to hold you back. If this house is the only thing standing between you and success, then who am I to keep it?" Damon's eyes widened. A spark of hope ignited in them, quickly fanned into a blaze of greed. "What are you saying, Dad?" I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump in defeat. "I am saying I will sign the papers," I said. "I will sign the deed." Tiffany slid off the bar stool so fast she almost tipped it over. She rushed to Damon's side, clutching his arm. "You mean it?" she breathed. "You will sign the quitclaim?" I nodded. "Yes, but not today." Bob slammed his hand on the counter, making us all jump. "Why not today, Zeke?" he demanded, his face flushing red. "We need that paper now. Every hour counts." I looked at Bob with wide, innocent eyes. "Because it is Christmas, Bob," I said softly. "This house, it was a Christmas gift to Viola 30 years ago. It feels wrong to just sign it away on a Tuesday. I want to do it right." I turned back to Damon. "Christmas Eve is tomorrow. We are having the big dinner, right? The one you ordered." Damon nodded eagerly. "Yes, Dad. The prime rib, the expensive wine, it is all coming." "Good," I said. "Then that is when I will sign. Before we eat, consider it my Christmas gift to you and Tiffany, a new beginning for everyone." Damon let out a whoop of joy. He grabbed me and hugged me hard. It was the first time he had hugged me in years, and it felt like being squeezed by a python. "Thank you, Dad," he said, his voice thick with relief. "You have no idea. You are saving us. This is the best gift ever." I patted his back awkwardly. "I hope so, son. I really hope it is everything you deserve." The mood in the house transformed instantly. It was like the sun had come out. The tension evaporated, replaced by a manic, celebratory energy. Bob ran to the study, presumably to call his creditors and tell them the asset was secured. Karen started talking about champagne. Tiffany actually smiled at me, a predatory smile that showed too many teeth. "Oh, Dad," she said, squeezing my shoulder, "you are doing the right thing. Shady Pines is going to be so good for you. They have a lovely garden. You will make so many friends." I smiled back. "I am sure I will, Tiff. I am sure I will." For the rest of the day, I was invisible again. They ignored me and Viola, which was exactly what I wanted. I spent the afternoon in the garage, pretending to look for old ornaments. In reality, I was meeting with Frank, the private investigator, who had slipped in through the side door. Frank handed me a thick legal binder. "Here it is, Zeke," he said, keeping his voice low. "The Scorched Earth Protocol." I opened the binder. It was beautiful. It contained everything. The irrevocable trust documents, proving the house had belonged to Viola's trust for a week. The foreclosure notices on Bob's properties that I had purchased through my holding company. The affidavits from the bank regarding Damon's fraudulent guarantor signatures. And the pièce de résistance, the eviction notice for the occupants of the property, effective December 25th. Frank watched me flip through the pages. "You are really going to do this on Christmas Eve?" he asked. "That is cold, Zeke, even for you." I looked at the oil stain on the garage floor where my Mustang used to sit before they sold it. "They wanted a show, Frank. They wanted a big family dinner. I am just providing the entertainment." Frank nodded, a grim smile playing on his lips. "The IRS agent is confirmed for 7 p.m. tomorrow," he said. "He will have 2 uniformed officers with him. They will wait for your signal." "The signal will be the toast," I said. "When I raise my glass, you send them in." Frank slipped out, and I hid the binder in a box labeled Christmas lights. I carried the box into the house, my heart beating a steady rhythm of anticipation. As I walked past the study, I heard Bob on the phone. The door was ajar, and his voice carried into the hallway. "Yes, Rocco, I know I am late, but listen to me. It is done. The old man is signing tomorrow night. The house is worth $1.5 million. I will have your money by Monday. I swear on my mother's grave." No, don't send the boys. I am telling you it is locked. We are popping champagne tomorrow." I paused, listening to the desperation in his voice. He was promising money he would never have, on a timeline he could never meet, to people who would kill him for lying. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I walked into the kitchen where Viola was peeling potatoes. They had graciously allowed her to cook the side dishes for her own eviction party. I put the box of lights on the table. "Is it ready?" Viola asked without looking up. "It is ready," I whispered. She stopped peeling. Her hands were wet and trembling. "Damon," she said softly. "What will happen to Damon?" I put my hand over hers. "Damon made his choice, Vi. He chose the shark over the swimmer. Now he has to learn how to breathe underwater." She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek with her wrist. "I prayed for him, Zeke. I prayed that he would come to me, that he would apologize, that he would stop this. I know, baby. But sometimes God answers prayers by giving you the strength to do the hard thing, not the easy thing." That night, the house was filled with noise. Damon was blasting Christmas music. Tiffany was laughing on the phone with her friends, bragging about the renovation plans. They were drinking my wine, eating my food, and celebrating my demise. I went to bed early. I lay in the dark, listening to their joy. It was the sound of ignorance. They were dancing on a trap door, and I was holding the lever. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve, a time for giving, and I was going to give them a lesson they would never forget. I closed my eyes and pictured the dinner table. I pictured the look on Bob's face when the IRS walked in. I pictured Tiffany's face when the credit card decline turned into an eviction notice. And I pictured Damon. I pictured my son realizing that the father he thought was a senile old fool was actually the one man he should have never crossed. "Sleep well, family," I whispered into the darkness. "Tomorrow, we feast." The dining room table looked like something out of a magazine spread for billionaires who had lost their souls. It was set with heavy crystal glasses that caught the light of the chandelier, and silver cutlery that Viola had kept wrapped in velvet for 40 years. But tonight the table did not feel like ours. It felt like a stage where a very bad play was about to reach its final act. Tiffany had outdone herself with the borrowed money. She had hired a private chef, a young man named Pierre, who was currently in my kitchen sweating over a standing rib roast. He was chopping herbs with a frantic energy, unaware that the check he would be handed at the end of the night was going to bounce higher than a rubber ball. The air was thick with the smell of roasting meat, truffle oil, and expensive red wine. It was a rich, suffocating scent that stuck to the back of my throat. I sat at the foot of the table. They had put Bob at the head in my chair. He sat there looking like a toad who had swallowed a canary, puffing on a cigar, even though we had a strict no-smoking rule in the house. Karen was next to him, draped in a fur stole that she had probably charged to one of the credit cards before I froze them. Damon and Tiffany sat across from each other, their eyes bright with a manic, feverish excitement. They were celebrating. They were drinking the vintage Bordeaux I had been saving for my golden anniversary, and toasting to their own cleverness. They thought the war was over. They thought the old man had surrendered. Damon stood up, tapping his knife against his wine glass. The sound rang out sharp and clear, cutting through the low murmur of conversation. "Family," he began, his voice thick with emotion and alcohol. "I want to make a toast to new beginnings, to the future of the Robinson legacy, and to Dad for finally doing the right thing." He raised his glass toward me. His smile was dazzling. It was the smile of a salesman who had just closed the deal of a lifetime. "To Dad," Tiffany echoed, raising her glass. "To Zeke," Bob boomed, leaning back in my chair. "A true gentleman." I picked up my water glass. My hand was steady. I looked at each of them in turn. I looked at the grease shining on Bob's chin. I looked at the calculation in Tiffany's eyes. I looked at the weakness in my son's jaw. "To the truth," I said softly. They didn't hear me, or if they did, they chose to ignore it. They drank deep, swallowing the lie along with the wine. Viola sat next to me. She hadn't touched her food. Her hands were folded in her lap, clutching her napkin so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked terrified. She kept glancing at the grandfather clock in the hallway. It was 6:55. "Eat something, Vi," I whispered, leaning close to her. "You need your strength." "I can't," she whispered back. "I feel like I am going to be sick." "Just breathe," I said. "It is almost time." Just then the chef walked out, carrying a massive platter. The prime rib was a masterpiece of culinary art, crusted with herbs and dripping with jus. He placed it in the center of the table with a flourish. "Dinner is served," he announced. Bob licked his lips. It was a grotesque sight. "Look at that," he said, reaching for the carving knife. "Now that is a meal fit for a king." He stood up, preparing to carve the meat that my money had paid for in the house that my sweat had built. And then it happened. The doorbell rang. It wasn't the soft, polite chime of a visitor. It was a long, firm press, a demand. Bob froze the knife hovering over the meat. Tiffany frowned, putting down her fork. "Who is that?" she asked, annoyed. "Did you invite anyone else, Damon?" Damon shook his head. "No. Maybe it is the notary. I told him to come by in the morning, but maybe he wanted to get a head start." He started to stand up. "Sit down, son," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had a weight to it that made him pause. "I will get it," I said, pushing my chair back. "I am the butler, remember?" Tiffany rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop being dramatic, Dad. Just get the door. And if it is carolers, tell them to go away. We are eating." I stood up. I didn't reach for my cane. I left it leaning against the table. I didn't need it anymore. The time for acting was over. I walked out of the dining room, my stride long and purposeful. I walked through the foyer, past the abstract art that covered my history, past the white walls that hid the cracks. I reached the front door. I could see the silhouettes through the frosted glass. 3 of them, standing tall against the driving snow. I unlocked the deadbolt. I turned the handle. The wind rushed in, carrying snowflakes that melted on the warm, hard wood. Standing on my porch were the 3 wise men of my retribution. On the left was Marcus Henderson, my lawyer. He was holding a briefcase that contained the legal equivalent of a nuclear warhead. In the middle was Sheriff Jim Miller. We had played high school football together 50 years ago. He was wearing his full uniform, his badge gleaming under the porch light, his hand resting casually on his belt. And on the right was a man I didn't know, but whose reputation preceded him. He wore a navy blue windbreaker with yellow letters on the back. Agent Rossi from the Internal Revenue Service. "Good evening, gentlemen," I said, stepping aside. "Zeke." Marcus nodded. "Is the party still going?" "It is just getting to the good part," I said. "Come on in." They stepped into the foyer, shaking the snow off their coats. The cold air followed them in a cleansing draft that cut through the stuffy smell of the truffle oil. Sheriff Miller looked at me. "You okay, Zeke?" "I am better than okay, Jim," I said. "I am awake." We walked toward the dining room. The sound of our boots on the floor was heavy, ominous. It sounded like an invading army. In the dining room, the laughter had started up again. Bob was telling a joke about a bad investment he had unloaded on a widow. So I told her it was a guaranteed return. He laughed, and she signed the check right there on the hood of her car. We walked into the room. The laughter died instantly. It didn't taper off. It was severed. Bob dropped the carving knife. It clattered onto the china platter, chipping the edge. Tiffany gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Damon turned pale, his mouth hanging open. The chef who was pouring gravy froze mid-pour, the sauce spilling onto the tablecloth. Who are these people?" Bob stammered, standing up. "What is going on?" I walked to the head of the table. I stood next to Bob. I looked down at him. "I believe you were sitting in my chair, Bob," I said. Bob looked at the sheriff, then at the IRS agent. Panic began to rise in his eyes like water in a sinking ship. "Zeke, what is this?" Damon asked, his voice high and trembling. "Who are these men?" I turned to my son. "You wanted witnesses, Damon," I said. "You wanted to make sure everything was legal. You wanted a signature. Well, I brought you the best witnesses money can't buy." I pointed to Marcus. You know Marcus. He has been my lawyer since before you were born. I pointed to the sheriff. And you know Sheriff Miller. He used to let you sit in his patrol car when you were 6. Then I pointed to Agent Rossi. But I don't think you know this gentleman. Damon, Bob, meet Agent Rossi. He works for the federal government, specifically the division that investigates people who like to spend money they don't have. Agent Rossi stepped forward. He didn't smile.
He didn't say Merry Christmas.
He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. Robert Miller, he said, looking at Bob. Bob swallowed hard. Yes, I have a warrant for your arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and running a Ponzi scheme. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the snow hitting the window. Bob collapsed back into the chair. My chair. That is ridiculous, he sputtered. My lawyers. Your lawyers are currently cooperating with the prosecution, Agent Rossi said. We raided your offices an hour ago. We have the hard drives, Bob. We have the emails. We have the ledger. Tiffany screamed. It was a sharp, piercing sound that shattered the tension. Dad, what is he talking about? Bob looked at his daughter. He looked old suddenly. The bluster was gone. The arrogance was gone. I can fix this, he whispered. I just need the loan. Damon, the house. Agent Rossi turned to Damon. Damon Robinson, he said.
Damon jumped, knocking his wineglass over.
The red wine spread across the white tablecloth like a blood stain. I didn't do anything, Damon cried. I was just helping him. I didn't know. Ignorance is not a defense when you sign guarantor documents for fraudulent shell companies, Agent Rossi said. We have your signature on 3 separate loan applications that used falsified assets as collateral. Damon looked at me. His eyes were wide, pleading. Dad, he begged. Dad, tell them. Tell them I didn't know. Help me. I looked at him. I looked at the son who had laughed about putting me in a nursing home. I looked at the son who was planning to move his mistress into my bed. I walked over to the table. I picked up the wine bottle. I poured myself a glass. I took a sip. It was excellent wine. I can't help you, son, I said calmly. Why? Damon screamed. Why can't you help me? You have money. You can hire lawyers. You can bail us out. I set the glass down. Because I don't have any money, I said.
They all stared at me.
What? Tiffany whispered. I don't have any money, I repeated. At least not technically. You see, 3 days ago, I transferred all my liquid assets, my savings, and the title to this house into an irrevocable trust. I gestured to Viola, the Viola Robinson Trust. I smiled at Tiffany. So even if I wanted to sign the deed tonight, I couldn't. I don't own the house. Viola does. And the trust has a very specific clause. It states that no beneficiary can access the funds if they are under federal investigation. I looked at Damon. And since you are now under federal investigation, son, you are cut off. Not just from the cards, but from the inheritance, from the house, from everything. Damon looked like he had been shot. You set us up, he whispered. I didn't set you up, I said. I just let you walk into the trap you built for yourself. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. Bob Miller, you need to come with us. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metal clicked ominously in the quiet room. Bob stood up shaking. He held out his wrists. Karen began to sob, loud, ugly sobs burying her face in the fur stole. Agent Rossi looked at Damon. We will need you to come down to the station for questioning. Mr. Robinson, you are not under arrest yet, but I wouldn't leave town if I were you. Damon looked at me one last time. Dad, please. It is Christmas Eve. I looked at the clock. It was 7:15. Merry Christmas, Damon, I said. The sheriff led Bob out. Agent Rossi escorted a stumbling, weeping Damon. Karen ran after them, her heels clicking on the floor. Tiffany sat alone at the table. She looked around the empty room, at the ruined dinner, at the wine stain on the cloth. She looked at me. Her eyes were full of venom. You planned this, she hissed. You planned this whole thing. You aren't senile. You are a monster. I walked over to the head of the table. I picked up the carving knife Bob had dropped. I wiped the blade on a napkin.
I am not a monster, Tiffany, I said quietly. I am a father, and a father's job is to teach his children. Sometimes you teach them with a hug, and sometimes... I stabbed the knife into the roast beef. It went in deep, hitting the bone with a dull thud. Sometimes you teach them with a knife. I looked at the chef,
who was standing in the corner, terrified. "Pack this up, Pierre," I said. "We are going to donate it to the homeless shelter. No one in this house has an appetite anymore." I walked over to Viola. She was crying soft tears of relief. I held out my hand. "Come on, V," I said. "Let's go sit by the fire. I believe we finally have the house to ourselves." She took my hand. We walked into the living room, leaving Tiffany sitting alone in the wreckage of her ambition. The front door closed. The sirens wailed in the distance, fading into the snowy night. The guests were gone. The parasites were gone. And for the first time in weeks, the air in the house was clean. The dining room was silent, except for the sound of heavy breathing and the distant wail of the sirens carrying Bob away. Damon stood by the table, his hand trembling as he reached into his jacket pocket. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting between Agent Rossi and me. He was desperate. He was terrified. But he still thought he had one card left to play. He thought he had the ace of spades. "Wait," Damon shouted, his voice cracking. "Wait just a minute. You can't arrest me. You can't freeze my assets, because I have equity. I have real property." He pulled out the crumpled piece of paper, the quitclaim deed that he had forced me to scribble on just 24 hours earlier. He smoothed it out on the tablecloth, right next to the stain of the spilled wine. "Look," he said, pointing a shaking finger at the signature. "Look right there. That is Ezekiel Robinson's signature. He signed the house over to me. It is dated yesterday. I own this property." The appraisal came in at $1.5 million. That is enough to cover the debts. That is enough to cover the bond. This is my house. He looked at Agent Rossi with a manic hope. "You can't kick me out of my own house," he pleaded. "I have the deed. It is legal." Tiffany, who was sitting slumped in her chair, perked up. She looked at the paper, then at Damon. For a second she thought he had actually done it. She thought he had saved them. Agent Rossi looked at the paper. He didn't pick it up. He just looked at it with a bored expression. Then he looked at me. "Mr. Robinson," he asked, "is that your signature?" I looked at the scrawl on the paper. It was a shaky, illegible mess made by a man pretending to be blind and senile. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I laughed. It started low in my chest, a deep, rumbling sound like thunder rolling over the plains. It built up, shaking my shoulders, clearing the dust from my lungs. It wasn't the cackle of a crazy old man. It was the rich, powerful laugh of a man who has held the winning lottery ticket in his pocket while watching everyone else scramble for pennies. I laughed until tears squeezed out of the corners of my eyes. I laughed until Damon took a step back, looking at me with genuine fear. "Why are you laughing?" he screamed. "Stop laughing. It is my house. You signed it." I wiped my eyes. I stood up straight, letting the cane fall to the floor with a loud clatter. I didn't need it. I never needed it. I stood to my full height of 6'2", my shoulders squared, my jaw set. The transformation was instant. The frail old victim vanished, and Zeke, the construction foreman, Zeke, the protector, stood in his place. I stopped laughing. I looked at my son with eyes that were clear and cold as ice. "You poor fool," I said, my voice booming in the quiet room. "You really didn't do your homework, did you? You were so busy measuring the drapes and counting the money, you forgot the first rule of construction. Always check the foundation." I nodded to Marcus, my lawyer. "Tell him, Marcus. Put him out of his misery." Marcus Henderson stepped forward. He opened his briefcase with a sharp click. He pulled out a document bound in blue legal paper. It looked old. The edges were soft, the paper slightly yellowed. "Mr. Damon Robinson," Marcus said, his voice calm and precise. "The document you are holding is worthless. You could have your father sign it in blood. You could have it notarized by the Pope himself and it wouldn't matter." Damon shook his head. "No, no, that is a lie. He owns the house. He built it." "He built it, yes," Marcus continued, "but he doesn't own it. Ezekiel Robinson hasn't owned this property for 10 years. Damon froze. Tiffany stood up, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "What?" Damon whispered. Marcus opened the blue folder. "10 years ago, after your father had his first heart scare, he came to my office. He was worried about the future. He was worried about protecting his assets, not from the market, but from unpredictable elements. So, on January 12, 2014, Ezekiel Robinson transferred the title of this property into an irrevocable trust. Marcus turned the document around and slid it across the table toward Damon. It is called the Viola Robinson Living Trust. Damon stared at the paper. He couldn't read it. His eyes were too full of panic. "A trust," he stammered. But Dad is the trustee, right? He controls it." Marcus shook his head. "Number. Your father is not the trustee. The sole trustee with the exclusive power to sell mortgage or transfer the property is the beneficiary." Marcus pointed a long finger toward the end of the table, toward the shadows where my wife was sitting, Mrs. Viola Robinson. Damon turned slowly. He looked at his mother. Viola sat there, small and quiet in her waiter's uniform. But she wasn't looking down anymore. She was looking straight at him. Her face wasn't angry. It was just sad. A profound, deep sadness that broke my heart to see. "Mom," Damon whispered. You own the house." Viola nodded slowly. "I do, Damon," she said softly. "I have owned it for a decade. Your father wanted to make sure that no matter what happened to his business, I would always have a roof over my head. He gave it to me." Damon let out a hysterical laugh. Okay, fine. So Mom owns it. But Mom loves me. Mom will sign it. Right, Mom? You will sign it to save me. I am your son. You won't let them take me to jail. Just sign the paper, Mom. We can transfer it from the trust." He started walking toward her, his hands out, pleading. Marcus stepped in between them. He didn't touch Damon, but his presence was a wall. "I am afraid she cannot do that," Marcus said, "even if she wanted to." "Why not?" Damon screamed. "It is her trust." "Because of Article 4, Section B," Marcus said, tapping the document. "We call it the bad actor clause." He picked up the document and began to read. "The trustee is strictly prohibited from selling, transferring, or leveraging the trust assets for the benefit of any lineal descendant who is under active criminal investigation, has a history of financial insolvency, or has attempted to defraud the grantors." Marcus looked up over his reading glasses. "You hit the trifecta, Damon. You are broke. You are under investigation by the IRS, and you just spent the last week trying to defraud your parents. The trust is ironclad. If your mother tried to sign this house over to you right now, the trust would automatically dissolve and donate the entire asset to the United Charities of Chicago." Damon fell back against the wall. He slid down until he was sitting on the floor. The piece of paper, the quitclaim deed, slipped from his fingers and landed on the rug. "It is over." The realization hit him like a physical blow. There was no life raft. There was no secret account. There was no equity. He was drowning, and he had tied the weights to his own ankles. Tiffany looked at Damon with pure, unadulterated hatred. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at the police. She looked at her husband, the man she had bullied and manipulated, and she saw a failure. "You idiot," she hissed. "You told me you checked the title. You told me it was clean." I checked the county records," Damon mumbled. "It said Robinson. It said Robinson Trust, you moron," Tiffany screamed. "You didn't read the fine print. You gambled my father's life on a clerical error." She grabbed her purse and started to storm out. Agent Rossi stepped in her path. "Not so fast, Mrs. Robinson," he said. "Your name is on those credit card receipts, too. We have a few questions about the $50,000 in charges made after the accounts were flagged for fraud." Tiffany's face went white. I walked over to where Damon was sitting on the floor. I looked down at him. He looked so small. He looked like the little boy who used to break things and try to hide the pieces under the rug. But this broken thing was too big to hide. "I didn't want to do this, Damon," I said quietly. "I really didn't. I gave you every chance. When you came to me asking for help, I was ready to give you the shirt off my back. But you didn't ask for help. You tried to take. You tried to steal. You tried to throw us away like garbage." Damon looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. Real tears this time. "I am sorry, Dad," he choked out. "I am so sorry." "I know you are, son," I said. "I know. But sorry doesn't pay the IRS, and sorry doesn't fix a cracked foundation." I turned to Viola. "It is your house, my love," I said. "What do you want to do with the trespassers?" Viola stood up. She walked over to the window and looked out at the flashing lights of the police cars. She took a deep breath. "I want them gone," she said. She turned to Agent Rossi. "Officer, please remove these people from my property. They are not family. Not anymore." Damon let out a wail as Agent Rossi pulled him to his feet. "Mom, please." "Don't call me that," Viola said, her voice trembling but strong. "My son died a long time ago. He died the day he decided that money was more important than his mother's dignity." She turned her back on him. I watched as they led him away. I watched as Tiffany was escorted out, still screaming about her rights. When the door finally closed, the silence that filled the house wasn't heavy anymore. It was light. It was clean. Marcus closed his briefcase. "Well, Zeke," he said, "I think that went according to plan." I looked at the empty table, the ruined feast, the empty chairs. "Better than plan, Marcus," I said. I walked over to the trust document lying on the table. I ran my hand over the signature, Viola's signature from 10 years ago. It wasn't a twist. It wasn't a trick. It was just the truth waiting to be discovered. And the truth I learned that night is that you don't need to own a house to be the king of your castle. You just need to know who really holds the keys. The handcuffs were clicking shut around Bob's wrists, but his mouth was still running. It was a reflex, I suppose. Men like Bob Miller spend their entire lives believing that if they just talk loud enough and use enough legal jargon, they can warp reality to their will. He struggled against the sheriff's grip, his face turning a shade of purple that clashed horribly with his expensive tuxedo. He looked at Damon sobbing on the floor. He looked at Tiffany frozen in shock. And then he turned his rage on me. "You think this is over, Zeke?" he bellowed, spitting flecks of saliva onto the hardwood floor. "You think because you found a loophole in a trust fund, you have won. You are delusional. I have lawyers in New York who will eat you alive. I will sue you for entrapment. I will sue you for defamation. And mark my words, old man, I will sue this estate for every penny it is worth." He lunged forward only to be jerked back by the sheriff, but he didn't stop screaming. "We are not going anywhere," he roared. "My company has rights. We have leverage. If you kick us out tonight, I will bury you in litigation so deep you will be living in a cardboard box. You will be on the street, Zeke. You and that wife of yours will be begging on the street corner before I am done with you." The room echoed with his threats. It was the desperate thrashing of a dying animal. Sheriff Miller looked at me, waiting for the signal to drag him out, but I held up a hand. "Wait, Jim," I said calmly. "Let him speak. I want to hear about his company." I walked slowly towards Bob. I stopped just outside of his reach. I looked him up and down, taking in the sweat staining his collar and the fear behind his bluster. "Your company," I repeated. "You mean Apex Horizon Global, right? The firm based on the 4th floor of the Centennial Building downtown." Bob sneered, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "That is right," he spat. "We have a 10-year lease. We are a pillar of the business community. You can't touch my corporate assets, Zeke. You are just a bricklayer. You don't know the first thing about corporate law." I smiled. It was a small, cold smile. "You are right, Bob," I said. "I am just a bricklayer. I spent 40 years laying bricks, one by one, row by row. But you know what happens when you lay enough bricks, Bob? You build an empire." I reached into the inside pocket of my suit jacket. I pulled out a folded document. It wasn't a deed this time. It was a commercial transfer agreement. I unfolded it slowly, smoothing the crease with my thumb. "You see, Bob, while you were busy trying to steal my house, I was busy doing some shopping of my own. I made a few phone calls this morning. It turns out the owner of the Centennial Building is an old friend of mine. We played poker together in the 80s. He told me he was having some trouble with a tenant on the 4th floor. A tenant who hadn't paid rent in 6 months. Bob's face went pale. The purple rage drained away, leaving him looking like wet dough. We have a payment plan," he stammered. "It is a temporary cash flow issue." I ignored him. "My friend wanted to sell," I continued. "He was tired of chasing bad debts. So I made him an offer, a cash offer. We closed the deal at noon today." I held the document up so Bob could see the letterhead. Iron Foundation Holdings, LLC. Bob squinted at the paper. Who is Iron Foundation?" he whispered. I tapped my chest. "I am," I said. The silence in the room was heavier than the snow falling outside. Tiffany gasped. Even Agent Rossi looked impressed. "You," Bob whispered. "You bought the building." "I bought the building," I said. "And I didn't stop there. I own the warehouse district on the south side. I own the strip mall where your wife gets her hair done. And as of today, I own the Centennial Building. I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. I am not just a retired construction worker, Bob. I am the landlord. And you know what landlords do with tenants who don't pay rent? I pulled another paper from behind the transfer agreement. It was a bright red eviction notice. We evict them, I said. I tucked the notice into the breast pocket of Bob's tuxedo. Your key cards have already been deactivated, I said. Security has been instructed to escort your staff out of the building. Your servers are being seized to cover back rent. And since your company is the guarantor for your personal loans, which are now in default, I believe I technically own that car sitting in my driveway too. Bob looked at me as if I had grown a second head. His entire worldview was collapsing. He had spent years looking down on me, treating me like a simple laborer, a blue-collar fool he could exploit. He never imagined that the man with the calloused hands owned the ground he walked on. But you live like a pauper, he choked out. You drive an old truck, you wear flannel. I looked at my hands. I live within my means, Bob, I said. That is why I have money. And you live on credit. That is why you are going to jail. I turned to the sheriff. Get him out of here, Jim, I said. He is trespassing on private property, and I have zero tolerance for squatters. Bob didn't scream anymore. He didn't threaten to sue. He slumped in the sheriff's grip, his legs giving out. He looked at me with a mixture of terror and awe. Zeke, please, he whispered. Goodbye, Bob, I said, turning my back on him. Sheriff Miller hauled him toward the door. Karen followed, weeping hysterically, asking if she could at least keep the fur coat. I didn't watch them go. I looked at Tiffany. She was sitting at the table, alone. Her husband was in handcuffs, her father was being dragged out, and her mother was a sobbing mess. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. Not the fear of being embarrassed, but the fear of a predator who realizes she has walked into the wrong cave. You own everything, she whispered. I walked over to the table and picked up the bottle of wine. I poured the last of it into my glass. I own what I built, Tiffany, I said, and tonight I am doing a little demolition work. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted like victory. The business takeover was complete. The house was secure. The enemies were vanquished. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more loose end to tie up, one more lesson to teach. I looked at Viola. She was standing by the fireplace, her hand resting on the mantel. She looked tired, but she stood tall. She was the queen of this castle, and I was her knight. We survived, Vi, I said. She smiled a sad, weary smile. We did more than survive, Zeke, she said. We conquered. I drank the wine, listening to the fading sirens. Yes, we did. And tomorrow we start rebuilding. But this time, we build a wall so high that no snake can ever climb over it again. I looked at the empty chair where Damon had sat. I hope you like the view from the bottom, son, I thought, because looking up is the only view you are going to have for a very long time. The dinner party was officially over, but the cleanup crew had just arrived. Agent Rossi didn't look like a man who enjoyed ruining Christmas Eve, but he looked like a man who was very good at his job. He stepped into the light of the chandelier, his shadow falling long and dark over the table where Bob Miller was still trying to comprehend that his reign of terror had ended. Rossi pulled a second pair of handcuffs from his belt. He looked at Karen, who was clutching her fur coat as if it were a life preserver on the Titanic. Mrs. Karen Miller, he said, his voice flat and professional. We also have a warrant for your arrest. Karen let out a sound that was somewhere between a shriek and a gag. She stood up, knocking her chair backward. Me, she screamed. Why me? I didn't do anything. I just signed the papers. Bob tells me to sign. I don't know anything about business. I am a victim here. Rossi shook his head. According to the documents provided by Mr. Robinson, you are the listed treasurer of Apex Horizon Global. You signed the tax returns, Karen. You signed the fraudulent loan applications. And most importantly, you signed the checks that moved investor money into your personal offshore accounts. Ignorance is not a defense when your signature is on the crime scene. He moved toward her. Karen scrambled backward, tripping over the hem of her expensive dress. She looked at Bob. Do something, Bob, she wailed. Tell them I didn't know. Bob didn't even look at her. He was too busy staring at the floor, mumbling to himself, trying to calculate a way out of a trap that had no exit. He had abandoned her, just like he had abandoned everyone else in his life when things got tough. Sheriff Miller stepped forward to assist Rossi. The sight of Karen Miller, the woman who had sneered at my wife's cooking and called us peasants, being handcuffed, was something I will never forget. She wasn't fighting for her freedom. She was fighting for her dignity, and losing badly. "My coat," she cried, as the metal clicked shut on her wrists. "Be careful with the fur. It is mink. It costs $12,000. I watched from the fireplace, my wine glass still in my hand. "Actually, Karen," I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria, "that coat belongs to the creditors now, just like the earrings, just like the car, just like the house you sleep in. You are wearing evidence, my dear, not fashion." She looked at me with pure venom, but before she could speak, the sheriff began to lead her and Bob toward the front door. The image of the two of them, the high society couple who thought they ruled the world, being marched out into the snow in handcuffs, was the first domino to fall. But the loudest crash was yet to come. The room felt suddenly empty with them gone, but the toxicity remained. It was concentrated now in the two people left at the table, Damon and Tiffany. Tiffany stood up slowly. She was staring at the empty doorway where her parents had just vanished. Her face was a mask of shock, but as the seconds ticked by, the shock began to crack, revealing a raw, ugly rage beneath. She turned her head slowly to look at Damon. Damon was sitting on the floor where he had collapsed earlier. He was hugging his knees, rocking back and forth. He looked like a child who had woken up from a nightmare, only to find the monster was real. Tiffany walked around the table. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor like the ticking of a bomb. She stopped right in front of him. "You promised me," she whispered. Her voice was low, trembling with fury. Damon looked up. His eyes were red and swollen. "Tiff, please," he stammered. "I didn't know." "You promised me," she screamed. The sound tore through the room, making the crystal glasses vibrate. "You told me you had it handled. You told me the house was yours. You told me my dad was a genius. You lied to me, Damon. You wasted 5 years of my life on a lie." Damon reached out to grab the hem of her dress. "Baby, listen to me. We can fix this. I can get a lawyer. We can start over." Tiffany kicked his hand away. She didn't just pull away. She kicked him. A sharp, vicious kick with the point of her expensive shoe. "Start over," she laughed, a cruel, hysterical sound. "Start over with what, Damon? You are broke. You are unemployed. You are under federal investigation. And now you are homeless. You have nothing. You are nothing." She looked down at him with a disgust so profound it made me shiver. "I married you because you had potential," she spat. "I married you because you were supposed to inherit this estate. I put up with your boring stories and your cheap suits because I thought there was a payoff at the end. But you were just a loser, Damon. A weak, pathetic loser who let his daddy outsmart him." Damon began to cry again. "Tiff, don't say that. I love you." "Love," Tiffany scoffed. "Love doesn't pay for spa treatments, Damon. Love doesn't buy Porsches. I am leaving you. I am calling a divorce lawyer in the morning. And don't you dare try to contact me." She turned to grab her purse from the table. She shoved the silverware into her bag. I saw her do it. She was stealing the spoons on her way out. It was pathetic. It was perfect. "Get out, Tiffany," I said. She froze. She looked at me. "I am going," she hissed. I wouldn't stay in this dump another minute. She marched to the door, wrapping her coat tight around her. She didn't look back at the husband she was leaving on the floor. She slammed the front door so hard the wreath fell off. And then there were 3, Miss Viola, and the boy we had raised. Damon was alone now. His allies were in handcuffs. His wife had abandoned him. His mistress I knew would be the next to vanish once the money dried up. He was stripped bare. He looked around the room. He realized there was no exit. He realized that the only people left in the world who might possibly care if he lived or died were the 2 people he had tried to destroy. He turned toward Viola. My wife was standing by the window, watching the police lights fade into the distance. She looked tired. She looked older than she had this morning. This war had taken a toll on her soul. "Mom," Damon whispered. He started to crawl toward her. He didn't stand up. He crawled on his hands and knees across the expensive rug across the cold floor. It was a biblical scene of prostration. The prodigal son returning, not with humility, but with desperation. "Mom, please," he sobbed. "You have to help me. I have nowhere to go. They froze my accounts." Tiffany took the car keys. "I can't go to jail, Mom. I will die in there." He reached the hem of her waiter's uniform. He grabbed the rough black fabric, burying his face in it. "I am your son, Mom. You love me. You always forgive me. Just tell Dad to stop. Tell him to drop the charges. Tell him to give me the house. Please, Mom, I am begging you." I watched Viola. I held my breath. I knew my wife. I knew her heart was soft. I knew that for 40 years she had forgiven every mistake this boy had made. She had forgiven the broken windows, the crashed cars, the failed college classes. She had always been his shield, but tonight, the shield was gone. Viola looked down at the man clutching her legs. She didn't pull away immediately. She reached down and placed her hand on his head. Damon stopped crying for a second, leaning into her touch, thinking he had won, thinking he was safe. But then Viola pulled her hand away. "Stand up, Damon," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it had the strength of steel. Damon looked up, confused. "Mom, stand up," she repeated, louder this time. "Do not kneel before me. You are a grown man. Act like one." Damon scrambled to his feet, wiping his nose on his sleeve. He looked at her with wide, hopeful eyes. So you will help me?" Viola looked him in the eye. "I helped you when you fell off your bike, Damon. I helped you when you failed math. I helped you when you lost your first job. I helped you because you were learning, because you were trying." She took a step back, creating a distance between them that felt like a canyon. "But I cannot help you with this. I cannot help you with greed. I cannot help you with malice. You didn't just make a mistake, Damon. You made a plan. You planned to throw your father and me into a nursing home. You planned to steal our legacy. You planned to erase us." Damon shook his head frantically. "No, Mom, it wasn't like that. It was Tiffany. She made me." Viola raised her hand, stopping him. "Do not blame her," she said. "She is a wolf, yes. But you opened the door. You let her in. You chose her world over ours, and now you have to live in it." "But I have nowhere to go," Damon wailed. Viola walked over to the table. She picked up the envelope that Agent Rossi had left behind. It contained the summons for his questioning. "You have somewhere to go," she said, handing him the paper. "You have a meeting with the consequences of your actions." Damon took the paper. His hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped it. He looked from Viola to me. "Dad," he whispered. I walked over to him. I stood next to Viola, presenting a united front. A wall he could not breach. "You heard your mother, son," I said. "The hotel is closed, the bank is closed, and as of tonight, this house is closed to you." Damon looked around the room one last time. He looked at the fireplace where he used to hang his stocking. He looked at the table where he used to do his homework. He looked at the ghosts of the childhood he had betrayed. He realized finally that he wasn't looking at his inheritance. He was looking at a museum of a life he had forfeited. He turned around. His shoulders slumped. He walked toward the door. He didn't look back. He opened the door and stepped out into the snow. He didn't have a coat. He didn't have a car. He just walked out into the cold, dark night. I closed the door behind him. I locked the deadbolt. The click was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I turned to Viola. She was crying now, silent tears running down her cheeks. I went to her and pulled her into my arms. We stood there in the hallway, holding each other amidst the ruins of our family. "It is done," I whispered into her hair. She nodded against my chest. "It is done," she said. "We lost a son, Zeke." I kissed her forehead. "No, Vi," I said softly. "We didn't lose him. He just went on a long journey. Maybe one day he will find his way back, but he has to walk this road alone." I looked at the abstract painting on the wall, the one Tiffany had hung to replace our ancestors. I reached up and ripped it off the wall. I threw it on the floor. Underneath, the paint was still fresh. "Tomorrow," I said, "we bring the pictures back up. Tomorrow, we take our house back." The collapse was total. The empire of lies had fallen. But the foundation was still standing, and it was stronger than ever. The party was over, but the hangover was just beginning. The house was silent except for the wind howling outside and the rhythmic tapping of Sheriff Miller's boot against the floorboards. He stood by the front door, arms crossed over his chest, a silent sentinel, making sure the eviction proceeded without violence. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers had faded into the night, taking Bob and Karen to a cell that was much smaller than the master suite they had tried to steal. Now it was just the cleanup. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at the landing. Damon and Tiffany were up there. I had given them a grace period, a mercy. I told them they had 30 minutes to pack their personal effects. Not the furniture, not the silver, not the electronics, just the clothes on their backs and whatever toiletries they could fit into a suitcase. I looked at the grandfather clock. 25 minutes had passed. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel happy. I felt like a man who had just survived a natural disaster. I was standing in the wreckage, assessing the structural damage, and realizing that while the foundation held, the walls were scarred. I heard the sound of a zipper being yanked violently, then the thud of a heavy bag hitting the floor. Damon appeared at the top of the stairs. He was wearing a parka over his suit, but he looked freezing. He was shivering from the inside out. He was dragging 2 large suitcases. One was his, one was Tiffany's. Even in her defeat, she refused to carry her own load. She walked behind him, clutching a Louis Vuitton handbag to her chest like a shield. Her mascara was smeared down her cheeks in black streaks, giving her the look of a raccoon that had been caught in the trash. They bumped the suitcases down the stairs. Thud, thud, thud. Each impact felt like a hammer hitting my heart. I remembered teaching Damon how to walk down these stairs holding his tiny hand. I remembered him sliding down the banister when he was 10. I remembered him walking down in his tuxedo for prom. Now he was walking down them for the last time. He reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor, at the spot where the rug used to be, before Tiffany rolled it up to replace it with something modern. "Is that everything?" Sheriff Miller asked, his voice rough, like gravel. Damon nodded. "Yes, that is everything." Tiffany pushed past him. She walked toward the door, her head held high in a pantomime of dignity that fooled no one. She stopped in front of me. She looked at my face, searching for a crack, searching for a sign of the old, weak Zeke she could manipulate. She found nothing but stone. "You will regret this," she hissed. "You are a cruel old man. You are going to die alone in this big, empty house." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had poisoned my son's mind. "I would rather die alone, Tiffany," I said calmly, "than live with a snake. At least when I am alone, I know my pockets are safe." She made a noise of disgust and pushed the front door open. The wind caught it, ripping it from her hand and slamming it against the exterior wall. Snow swirled into the foyer, landing on her expensive boots. She stepped out into the dark, dragging her suitcase through the slush. She didn't wait for Damon. She didn't look back. She marched toward her car, which I knew she wouldn't be able to start, because I had the keys in my pocket. But that was a lesson for 5 minutes from now. Damon was still standing there. He hadn't moved. He was gripping the handle of his suitcase so hard his knuckles were white. He looked at the sheriff. Then he looked at the kitchen where Viola was sitting in the dark. Can I say goodbye to Mom?" he whispered. I stepped in front of him, blocking his view. "No," I said. "You said goodbye to your mother when you tried to put her in a state facility. You said goodbye when you laughed about selling her home. You don't get to say it again just to make yourself feel better." Damon's chin trembled. A single tear rolled down his nose. "Dad, please. I am scared." I looked at him. I saw the fear. It was real. For the first time in his life, he had no safety net, no trust fund, no credit card, no daddy to fix it. "You should be scared, son," I said. "The world is a cold place when you don't have a coat made of other people's money." I pointed to the open door. "Go." Damon took a step toward the door. The wind blew snow into his face. He flinched. He looked out at the driveway, which was dark and empty. The reality of his situation hit him. He had nowhere to go. No hotel would take him without a credit card. His friends, the fair-weather friends he had bought with my money, wouldn't answer his calls once they heard the news. He turned back to me. He dropped the handle of the suitcase. He looked like he was about to fall to his knees again. "Dad," he choked out, his voice rising in panic. "Where do I go? Seriously, Dad, where do I go? I have no money. I have no gas. It is Christmas Eve." I looked at him. I felt the urge, the ancient fatherly urge, to reach into my wallet and give him $100, to give him a key to a motel, to fix it one last time. But then I thought about the recording. I thought about him calling his mistress, I thought about him calling me a pathetic old fool. If I helped him now, I wouldn't be saving him. I would be crippling him. He needed to fall. He needed to hit the bottom so hard that he would either shatter or rebuild himself into something real. I walked to the door. I grabbed the handle. I looked my son in the eye. "Go anywhere you want, Damon," I said. "Go to a shelter. Go to a church. Go to the street." I started to close the door. "Just go out of my life." "Dad, wait." I didn't wait. I slammed the heavy oak door shut. I threw the deadbolt. Click. I threw the secondary lock. Click. I put the chain across. The sound of the locks engaging was the loudest sound in the world. I stood there for a moment, staring at the wood. I could hear him on the other side. I could hear him pounding on the door. "Dad, open up, please, it is cold." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Sheriff Miller walked over to me. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Zeke," he said softly. "Tough love is the hardest love there is." I nodded. My throat felt tight. "I know, Jim, but it still feels like I just cut off my own arm." The pounding stopped after a minute. Then I heard the sound of wheels dragging through the snow. Then silence. I turned around. The foyer was empty. The white walls that Tiffany had painted looked stark and cold, but they were mine. I walked into the kitchen. Viola was sitting at the table. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at her hands. "Is he gone?" she asked. "He is gone," I said. She nodded slowly. She stood up and walked over to the stove. She picked up the kettle. "I am going to make tea," she said. "Do you want tea?" I watched her. She was going through the motions. She was finding comfort in the routine. "Yes, V," I said. "Tea sounds good." I walked over to the window. I pulled back the curtain just an inch. I saw the taillights of a taxi disappearing down the street. Damon must have called a cab. He was gone. I let the curtain fall back. I looked around the kitchen. It was messy. There were dirty dishes from the party. There were footprints on the floor. I took off my suit jacket. I rolled up my sleeves. "Leave the tea for a minute, Vi," I said. She looked at me. "Why?" I picked up a trash bag. "Because we have work to do. I want every trace of them out of this house before Christmas morning. I want the guest room cleared out. I want the abstract art off the walls. I want the smell of her perfume out of the air." Viola looked at me. A spark returned to her eyes. "You are right," she said. She reached into the drawer and pulled out another trash bag. We started cleaning. We worked in silence, side by side, just like we had when we built this life 40 years ago. We threw away the fancy soaps Tiffany had bought. We threw away the magazines. We threw away the pretension. By midnight, the house was clean. We had dragged the old family photos up from the basement. We hung the picture of Viola's father back in the hallway. We put the picture of our wedding day back on the mantle. We sat in front of the fire, exhausted, but at peace. The house felt different. It felt smaller, but warmer. It felt like ours again. I looked at Viola. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Robinson," I said, raising my tea mug. She clinked her mug against mine. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Robinson." We sat there, watching the fire burn. We were two old people in a big house with no children to wake us up in the morning. But we weren't empty. We were full. We were full of the truth. And as the clock struck 12, signaling the start of a new day, I knew one thing for sure. The cleanup was over. The renovation was complete. And the foundation? The foundation was solid as rock. The sun came up over Chicago like a quiet benediction. It was Christmas morning. Usually, this house would be filled with noise. There would be the tearing of wrapping paper. There would be the sound of the television blaring parades. There would be Damon complaining that his coffee wasn't strong enough, and Tiffany critiquing the tree decorations. But today, there was only silence. And let me tell you, silence is the most expensive gift I have ever received. I woke up not in the cramped office downstairs, but in my own bed. The master suite felt huge. The sheets were crisp and cold. I lay there for a long time, just listening to the wind whistling softly against the eaves. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel tight. The weight of the deception, the heavy cloak of playing the fool, was gone. I was just Zeke again. I put on my robe, my old, comfortable flannel robe, not the stiff waiter's uniform I had worn the night before. I walked down the hallway. The abstract paintings were gone from the walls. In their place, the pale rectangles of unfaded paint stood out like scars, waiting for our history to cover them up again. I liked the scars. They were proof that we had survived the surgery. I found Viola in the living room. She was sitting in her favorite armchair, the one Tiffany had tried to move to the garage. A fire was crackling in the hearth, casting a warm orange glow over the room. She was holding a mug of coffee with both hands, staring into the flames. She looked peaceful. The lines of worry that had etched themselves around her mouth over the last few weeks seemed to have smoothed out overnight. I poured myself a cup from the pot she had made. I walked over and sat in the chair opposite her. "Merry Christmas, Vi," I said softly. She looked up and smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. "Merry Christmas, Zeke." We sat there for a while, just drinking our coffee. We didn't need to talk. We had been married for 50 years. We could have entire conversations with just a look. But there was one question hanging in the air, drifting like the smoke from the fire. Viola took a sip of her coffee, then set the mug down on the coaster. She looked at me with a spark of mischief in her eyes. "So," she said, "Iron Foundation Holdings." I chuckled, leaning back in my chair. "It has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" "It sounds expensive," she said. "How long, Zeke? How long have you owned the building Bob's company was in?" I looked into the fire. I watched a log crumble into glowing embers. "About 6 hours," I admitted. "But I have had my eye on it for 6 months. I knew Bob was in trouble. I knew he was skipping rent payments. I did my due diligence. I was planning to buy it next month." Viola raised an eyebrow. "Next month? Why next month?" I reached into the pocket of my robe and pulled out a small velvet box. I had retrieved it from the safe in the floorboards of the closet where I kept the things that actually mattered. "Because next month is our 50th anniversary," I said. "I wanted to give it to you, not the building itself, but the income. The rents from that property are enough to send us around the world 3 times over. I wanted to hand you the keys and say, 'Here, Vi, pack your bags. We are going to Paris. We are going to Rome. We are going to wherever you want, for as long as you want.'" I handed her the box. She opened it. Inside wasn't a diamond. It was a simple gold key, the master key to the Centennial Building. Viola looked at the key, then at me. Her eyes filled with tears. "You bought a skyscraper for our anniversary?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Just a mid-rise," I corrected gently. "But yes, I wanted to secure our future. I had to use the present early to clean up the past. I had to accelerate the closing to get the eviction notice ready for last night." "I hope you don't mind that your gift came with a little drama attached." Viola laughed. She closed her hand around the key, holding it tight to her chest. "Mind? Zeke, watching Bob Miller realize that you were his landlord, was the best show I have ever seen. It was better than Paris." We laughed together then. It felt good to laugh. It felt clean. But then, the laughter faded, replaced by the solemn reality of the empty chairs at the dining table. Viola looked toward the front window. The drapes were open, revealing a world buried in white. "Do you think he is okay?" she asked. She didn't have to say his name. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the long driveway. The snow had been falling heavily all night. "I don't know, V," I said honestly. "I thought about Damon. I thought about him waking up this morning. Maybe he was in a shelter. Maybe he was on a friend's couch. Maybe he was cold." "It hurts, Zeke," Viola whispered. "It hurts to know he is out there with nothing." I turned back to her. "He doesn't have nothing, Vi. He has his health. He has his education. He has the lessons we taught him, even if he chose to ignore them for a long time." I walked back to her chair and knelt down, taking her hands in mine. "Listen to me. We gave him everything. We gave him love. We gave him money. We gave him opportunities. And he used them to build a cage for himself. He needs to learn how to break out of that cage on his own. If we opened the door for him last night, we would have kept him a child forever, a cruel, spoiled child." Viola nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know," she said. "I know you are right, but I am still a mother, and I am still a father," I said, "and that is why I closed the door. Not to lock him out, but to force him to find his own key. Maybe one day he will knock on that door not as a beggar and not as a thief, but as a man. And if that day comes, we will open it, but not a moment before." She squeezed my hands. "You are a tough old man, Ezekiel Robinson." I kissed her knuckles. I had to be. I had to protect my queen. I stood up and pulled her to her feet. "Come here," I said. "Look." We stood together at the large bay window. The morning light was blindingly bright, reflecting off the snow. Last night, that driveway was a mess. It was scarred with the tire tracks of police cars. It was marked with the footprints of the IRS agents. It was gashed by the wheels of Damon's suitcase as he dragged his life away. It was ugly. It was a map of our pain. But now, the snow had covered everything. It was a perfect, pristine sheet of white. No tracks, no footprints, no evidence of the betrayal. It was a blank canvas. "It is gone," Viola whispered. "The mess is gone." "Nature has a way of hitting the reset button," I said. I put my arm around her waist, pulling her close. We were two old trees standing in a winter forest. We had weathered the storm. We had lost some branches. The wind had tried to knock us down. But our roots went deep, deeper than greed, deeper than money. "What do we do now?" Viola asked, resting her head on my shoulder. I looked at the blank white snow. I saw the future there. "Now?" I said. "Now I think I am going to make some waffles. And then I am going to call a contractor to fix that crack in the foundation I told Damon about." Viola looked up at me, confused. "I thought you made that up. To trick him?" I smiled. "I did. There is no crack. But I think we should build that sunroom you always wanted. The one with the view of the garden. Since we have the house to ourselves, we might as well make it perfect." Viola smiled. "I would like that. A sunroom. A place for new plants to grow." "Exactly," I said. "New growth." We stood there for a long time, watching the snow fall, holding on to each other, the masters of our own fate, the captains of our own souls. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of us, and that was more than enough. Silence is never a sign of weakness. Often, it is the sound of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. We spend our lives building castles for our children, only to realize some are merely waiting for us to vacate the throne. True legacy isn't about the assets you leave behind, but the dignity you keep until your very last breath. Never hand over the keys to your kingdom to those who haven't built a single brick. In the end, respect isn't given, it's asserted, sometimes with a checkmate that no one saw coming. And that is my story. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do, but I saved my dignity, and I saved my wife. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us share more stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, do you think I was too hard on Damon, or did he get exactly what he deserved? I read every single comment. Until next time, keep your head up and keep your keys safe.